Oh, hi there. You just caught me thinking about King of Fighters. Yes, welcome back to part 4 of our King of Fighters retrospective, and well, when we last left KOF, things weren't looking too good. If you need a refresher, King of Fighters was a crossover fighting game between various SNK properties, but over its annual installments, it introduced tons of original characters, established its own lore, and even set up continuous storylines that were groundbreaking for fighting games at the time. However, after a long string of bad financial decisions, SNK was bought by a pachinko company that let them go bankrupt. But somehow, they were able to come back from the brink of death as SNK's founder Aikichi Kawasaki bought up all their old properties and brought them over to a new company named SNK Playmore. However, these new SNK games weren't selling all that well, and they were costing far more to make, and the new president of SNK wanted to shift all their attention away from video games and towards pachinko slots, leading to King of Fighters 13 being the last new console game they would release for the foreseeable future. After all this time, after everything that SNK had been through, their gaming division was now dead, and it was killed by their own company. There was no coming back from this. So let's find out how they came back from this in the exciting conclusion to the King of Fighters retrospective.
It all began in 94, kept on rolling in 95, pieces were replaced in 96, it came to the hand in 97, and now it comes, and here we go, KOF is here again, nothing since Saga 1998.
Okay, so where were we? SNK's gaming division, dead. SNK's president, dancing on its grave. Hopes for the future, non-existent. Yes, around the beginning of the Ash Crimson Saga, SNK's president Koichi Toyama said that SNK would be, quote, moving its core business focus from games to pachinko slot machines. We will concentrate our resources on the rapidly growing and highly profitable business of slots. And as time went on and their gaming division was costing them more money for less returns, they began to put more resources towards their patchy slots. Then, right before King of Fighters 12 was released, Koichi Toyama stepped down and was replaced by Soichiro Hosoya, who said that he was dedicated to, quote, ramping up all current projects for the new growing stage. Hey, that sounds like good news! He left the company within less than a year. He was then replaced by Ryo Mizufune, who honestly, I know nothing about. Listen, I've spent the last 6 months diving as deep as I possibly can into the history of King of Fighters and everyone behind the scenes, all the developers and the artists, and everyone from top to bottom over at SNK, and this guy has remained the biggest mystery to me. I can't even find a photo of him. If you look him up on Mobile Games, the IMDb of video games, he only has one credit, and it's King of Fighters 13. The only thing I know about Ryo Mizufune is that he didn't come from the gaming wing of SNK. No, before being promoted to president, Mizufune worked exclusively within SNK's pachinko division, and upon becoming president, he wanted SNK to focus even more on, prepare to be surprised, their pachinko division. So yeah, SNK's gaming division was tanking pretty fast, but Mizufune being put in charge was the final nail in the coffin. Their game division was done. But 3 years later, in 2012, there was hope, as Mizufune stepped down and was replaced by Masao Ohata, who used to be vice president of Bandai's American division, meaning that SNK was now being headed up by someone who actually used to work within video games. Okay, this looks good. This looks like things could turn around. And now that Ohata was in charge, he put in place a brand new, bold plan for the future of SNK. A bold plan called immediately quitting and leaving the company. Yes, Mizufune's 3-year stint at the company might have seemed short, but Ohata was hired in November of 2012 and then left the company in November of 2013. So, I just want to make sure that we all understand what happened here. For starters, going through 3 different presidents within the course of 4 years, not exactly a sign the company was very stable. I mean, I'm not exactly an economic genius, but I'm pretty sure your presidents aren't supposed to show up like Grandpa Simpson. And just to make sure that we all understand this, after 3 years of just focusing on pachinko machines, SNK hired a new president who actually came from the world of video games, and he immediately left the company. I have no way of knowing if this is true, but that just screams to me that Ohata showed up, went to the higher-ups and investors and said, "Okay guys, I think it's time that we start focusing on video games again." So, okay, we're now on year 4 of the SNK Pachinko crisis, and Ohata, the one guy with the video game background, was kicked out. But luckily, SNK would take a bold direction with their next president, as they replaced Ohata with the bright upcoming star, Koichi Toyama.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
Wait a second. Koichi Toyama? You're the guy who started this whole mess! What the hell are you doing back? Yeah, SNK decided, screw it, just bring back the first guy, he'll toe the company line. And toe the company line he did. In August of 2015, SNK was acquired by a brand new owner, the Chinese media company Lido Millennium. Well, okay, because I know someone is going to correct me on this, it was actually acquired by 2 companies that teamed up under a third company, and that third company created Lido Millennium to be a joint venture between the first 2 companies, but I'm not explaining that every single time that they come up. So for the sake of simplicity, it was acquired by Lido Millennium. And as you can imagine, this left fans wondering what plans the new owners might have for SNK's library. Could they actually make a new game? Could they actually make literally anything that wasn't a pachinko machine? Well, a week after SNK was bought up, Koichi Toyama put those questions to rest when he was talking about the acquisition and the future of SNK, and he said, quote, "Our company is a pachinko slot maker, but we're also a video game developer. We'd like to work hard to make video game fans into pachinko slot fans." Wow! Hope y'all didn't go deaf from him saying the quiet part as loud as he possibly could. Yeah, listen, anytime that a company turns to the greedy world of pachinko, it's not typically because they just have a passion for the sport of dropping tiny balls into a slot machine. No, it's typically because they want something that can bring in easy money for little to no effort. Video games take time and energy to make. Pachinko machines let you just sit back and watch the addiction money flow in. Of course, a greedy company would want you to stop playing their video games and instead just focus on their pachinko machines, but you don't say that. You'd be crazy to actually say that. And here Koichi Toyama was actually saying that. Yeah, SNK did not care anymore. They knew what they were. They were a gambling company now. They wanted you to stop playing their games and just put money into their pachinko machines, and nothing was going to change. Wait, what? Yes, in September of 2015, 1 month after being purchased by Lido Millennium and Toyama made these comments about trying to move their video game fans to their pachinko machines, SNK announced during a Sony press conference that King of Fighters 14 was a thing. And there was a trailer for it with Kyo and Iori in new designs on a brand new stage with a super catchy new song, and it looked ugly as sin, but who cares? It's King of Fighters and it's back and it was going to come out next year? Could this be real? Could it be possible that SNK was back? No, there's no way. This was just some one-off thing. You heard Koichi Toyama. SNK was now a pachinko company. And that's just the way things were. SNK Playmore ditches pachinko machines to focus entirely on video games. I'm sorry, I'm going to need a minute. I'm not used to reporting good news for SNK. Yes, in August of 2015, SNK's president said they wanted to turn their video game fans into pachinko fans. Then 1 month later, they revealed a new installment of their biggest video game series was on the way. Then 2 months after that, they shut down their pachinko division completely so that way they could put all their focus towards video games. Damn, life really does come at you fast.
Well, that's the end of me.
Now, I've heard many people say that the reason they shut down their pachinko division might have been due to later millennium, that they just didn't want them to focus on pachinko anymore. And that might have played into it a little, but upon looking into it, it appears that SNK's pachinko division was already on its way out. Yeah, it looks like SNK's deal with the digital devil didn't actually pan out for them. And there's two big reasons for this. First up, yes, pachinko machines do have a strong addictive player base in Japan, but that audience tends to be older. Consumers in their 20s weren't buying this. The younger demographic wasn't showing up for pachinko like SNK wanted. And heck, they weren't the only ones. In the very same month, Sega also laid off a huge chunk of their pachinko division because their machines were tanking. Sega had put a lot of money into producing a Bayonetta pachinko machine to try and bring in that younger audience, and that younger audience said, "What the hell is this? Where's Bayonetta 3? People in their 20s wanted video games, not gambling, so this younger demographic was hitting the pachinko industry hard. And you know who else was hitting the pachinko industry hard? The law. In the press release where SNK announced they were quitting pachinko, they said it was due to a declined player base and changes to Japan's pachinko regulations. Now, the declined player base is obvious, but what's this about regulations? Why were these new regulations causing SNK to drop out pachinko production? Well, despite this being such a major shift for SNK, they were fairly tight-lipped beyond this point. All they said was, things are changing, so we're quitting, and that's it, no further details. So if you want to understand what these changing regulations were and how they could have impacted SNK and led to the end of their pachinko machines, then you'd have to dig through countless legal journals and do a tedious deep dive through the history of Japan's gambling policies, which is exactly what I did. Okay, before we go any further, just want to warn everyone, Japanese gambling laws aren't really my forte, and my legal expertise resides somewhere between Unfrozen Caveman Lawyer and Lionel Hutz. So take everything that I'm about to say with a huge grain of salt, but I think I was able to dig through this enough to grasp what these new regulations were and why it impacted SNK, and I have to say, it's actually pretty fascinating. Now, the first thing that you need to realize about pachinko is that in Japan, gambling is illegal. And you might be thinking, wait, hold up. But pachinko is huge in Japan. Isn't pachinko gambling? And the answer to that is yes, and also no. Pachinko has always managed to just barely limbo under the law and reside in a gray area in Japan thanks to a few loopholes. For starters, in Japan, they classify gambling as something that requires no skill and it's all left up to luck. You pull a slot machine, you have no control over what comes up. You play blackjack, you have no control over what cards you get dealt. You play roulette, you have no control over how the wheel spins. But in pachinko, you have a bucket of tiny metal balls and you pour them into a machine to see where they land. But because you get to control the speed at which the balls are shoved into the machine and how many fall at once, it's been successfully argued that there is some level of skill, so it doesn't count. Also, many patchy slot machines will have some kind of a mini game that can be triggered requiring you to hit a button causing numbers to flash up on the screen that determine whether or not you win. And even though those numbers are typically randomly generated, you are pressing a button, so it does create the illusion of skill. But, and perhaps more importantly, gambling is also classified as something where you are trying to win money. You go to a casino, you trade in your money for chips, you win a few more chips, you trade in those extra chips for more money. But in pachinko, yes, you do trade in your real money for some kind of a fake money, but after you win more fake money, you then take that fake money to the counter, and you don't trade it back in for real money. You trade it in for prizes. Aw man, I won big at the pachinko machine, and all they gave me was this stupid toy dinosaur. I didn't want a toy dinosaur. Those coins that I got should have been worth 50,000 yen. What am I supposed to do with a dumb toy dinosaur? Whoa, hold up. Right outside this pachinko parlor, in the very same building as the pachinko parlor, there's a pawn shop. And that pawn shop is willing to give me 50,000 yen for this toy dinosaur. What are the odds? So you then trade in your prize for the amount of money that you expected to get, then you come back next week, win another 50,000 yen worth of fake coins, take those up to the counter, and they give you another toy dinosaur that looks very similar to the same toy dinosaur you traded to the pawn shop last week. What are the odds? So, now that we understand the weird gray area that is the Japanese pachinko industry, what exactly were these regulations that changed everything around? Well, as I said, the player base for pachinko machines are typically older citizens, and that player base was shrinking. So, the Pachi industry needed to do something to bring in a larger audience, so they figured that with the 2020 Olympics coming to Japan, it would be the perfect time to spread the craze to the rest of the world. So, the Pachi industry started campaigning for the government to legalize casinos. Well, after years of campaigning for it, the Japanese government decided to finally give the pachinko industry the attention it had been craving. Which proceeded to immediately screw over the pachinko industry. Yes, in September of 2014, the Japanese government decided to give legalizing pachinko in casinos a test run. They were still in that legal gray zone, but if this test worked out, then maybe it would result in legalization. So what did this mean exactly? Well, it meant that now every pachinko machine had to pass inspection from the Japanese government, so that way they could regulate the random number generator that I mentioned earlier to make sure that it actually gave players a fair chance at winning. This meant any new pachinko machine had to pass inspection, which could take 6 to 8 months. And if your machine passed inspection, then that meant it could be released. As long as you didn't mind paying some additional new charges. Yes, the government was now taking a chunk out of the sales of these machines, because if something is legal, that means it's taxable. So to summarize, the pachinko industry wanted to legalize casinos. And the Japanese government said, cool, then you can't just scam people out of all their money, you have to make sure that they actually have a shot at winning. It will take half a year or longer for you to release your machine, and when it does release, you'll make less money off of it. And SNK looked at that and said, hey, whatever happened to those video games that we used to make? Yeah, as I said, those new regulations went into place in September of 2014, which is the exact time when production of King of Fighters 14 started. Wow, that's some convenient timing. By the way, if you ever wondered how bad of a company Konami is, they abandoned their video games for pachinko machines in 2015. A year after all of this started. So yeah, just had to point that out. SNK saw a sinking ship and swam to safety. Konami saw a sinking ship and bought a ticket for it. And so, here we were. SNK was now under a brand new owner, but they had finally scrapped their pachinko division and had come crawling back to their video games. And the cherry on top, just to really wash the past couple of years out of everyone's mind, in 2016, SNK Playmore would drop the Playmore from its name and return to its original title of just SNK. And then, later that year, after 6 years of silence, a sound rang out that the world had not heard in a long time. King of Fighters 14 released in August 2016, and as I said, this was SNK's big triumphant return. Pachinkos were gone, and this was going to resurrect their gaming division. So of course they put all of their time and energy and budget into bringing this to life. I'm just kidding, it was maybe one of their most crunched games ever. Yes, after researching the production of every single game in this franchise, I feel pretty confident in saying only King of Fighters 94 and King of Fighters 2001 had more crunched developments. This game was headed up by Yasuyuki Oda, who previously had a long-running history at SNK, having been one of the youngest employees of the company when the original King of Fighters was being made, and going on to be the designer for Gauro Mark of the Wolves. But after SNK decided it was done with its video games, he then went over to Capcom, where he was a game designer and director for Street Fighter IV, the game that not only resurrected Street Fighter, but the 2D fighting game scene in general. This is some cosmic level poetry, because if you remember way back in part 1 of this series, the very first KOF was created by the guy who helped to create Street Fighter. And now this game that needed to bring KOF back would be made by the guy who helped to bring Street Fighter back. History was repeating itself, and in more ways than one. So okay, Yasuyuki Oda was a great pick for this game. Things were off to a good start. And that's where the good ended, because everything after this was a spiral of complications. SNK was bringing King of Fighters back, but they didn't want to spend a lot of time or money on it. Two things that video games tend to need. The team had just under 2 years to get this made, a pretty tight deadline for any modern day fighting game. Well, luckily, this game had a rich full staff dedicated to the project, right? Wrong. There were only 4 designers on this game. For anyone who doesn't know, a game designer is basically the person in charge of mapping out the game, coming up with the mechanics, the characters, and figuring out how everything will work. And to implement these ideas, the game had 8 programmers on staff. Just to put that into perspective, earlier that same year Street Fighter V came out, and that game had 15 programmers, almost double what this game was working with. Well, at least this game had a strong budget behind it. Why am I even phrasing that as a question when you all know the answer? I mentioned that SNK's big push into the world of Pachinko had flopped, so their coffers were dry. You wanna know how broke SNK was at this time? I mentioned that halfway through this game's production they got bought out by Lato Millennium. They were bought for $65 million. That is literally 0.1% what Microsoft just bought Activision for. Don't get me wrong, $65 million isn't pocket change, but in the world of video game studios, yeah, it's pocket change. And SNK was not willing to spend much of its very limited budget on this game. Yasuyuki Oda asked the higher-ups at SNK to use Unreal Engine on this game to make it look as good as possible. And as you can tell from what you're seeing on screen right now, it does not look as good as possible. Yeah, I'm about to say a lot of really nice stuff about this game, but let's get this out of the way right now. This game looks rough. Oda asked his bosses if they could use Unreal Engine, and his bosses said, "We have Unreal Engine at home." So they forced the production team to make their own engine for this game. So this game had a small staff, no money, and a rush schedule. So of course, on top of all that, why not make the developers also come up with their own engine out of some sand and coconuts? And these graphics, yikes. Just zoom in on the hair, you can see jagged pixel lines popping out. You can see colors crackling away and turning to static underneath their clothing. This game looks bad. So okay, no money, no staff, no time. With all that going against it, clearly this game was going to be bare bones. Is what you would expect. But you see, Yasuyuki Oda once said that when he just started working at SNK, he remembered Toyohisa Tanabe and Takashi Nishiyama pitching the idea for the very first KOF. And he remembers everyone looking at them like they were crazy because there was no way they could fit that many characters into this game with such a small budget and such a small production time. And now, 20 years later, Yasuyuki Oda had been placed in charge of the new KOF, and he proceeded to tell his team they were going to put 50 characters into this game, making it the largest non-dream match King of Fighters ever. And his team looked at him like he was crazy because there was no way they could fit that many characters into this game with such a small budget and such a small production time. But Yasuyuki Oda knew that big rosters were one of the best things about KOF. So if they wanted to say KOF was back, then they had to go big or go home. And remember, we were now moving into the world of 3D graphics, meaning they couldn't recycle any elements from the previous games. This wasn't like previous KOFs or a lot of other sprite-based games from the late 90s or early 2000s where you could just take old sprites and drop them into a new game. Every single one of the 50 characters had to be created from scratch. If you remember in part 3, when we talked about the development of King of Fighters 12 and 13, they said that they spent a year and a half on every single character to bring them to life. For King of Fighters 14, Oda said every single character had to be made and fully developed in 10 to 11 days. And you can certainly see some cut corners. There are 3 characters on this cast who either wear masks or had their faces completely obscured, and that wasn't a design choice. They didn't do that in order to add an air of mystery to them. They did that so they wouldn't have to animate their faces. That's the kind of limitations these devs were under. This was not we couldn't include that special mode kind of crunch. This was you don't have a face anymore kind of crunch. But here's the crazy thing. When you read interviews with these developers, you never get the sense that they hated this. Don't get me wrong, they were concerned. They were definitely rushed. I can only assume they had no idea how they were going to get this thing made in time, and I am in no way trying to make light of the crazy amount of crunch they must have been under. However, when you read interviews with these developers, you can almost feel excitement coming off of them. King of Fighters has always been a game that ran on passion. It's a game where you get a sense that each installment was a labor of love, and you really get that feeling with this game as well. Again, they should have been given more time, they should have been given a larger staff and a larger budget, and they definitely should have been allowed to use Unreal Engine. But listening to these guys talk about this game, you can tell they were just happy for King of Fighters to be back. And they weren't the only ones. I've heard multiple big KOF fans rave about this game. I've seen so many videos and forums ranking this as one of the best in the entire series. And speaking personally, yeah, I love this game. And it will always hold a special spot in my heart because this was the very first King of Fighters I ever played. Oh yeah, I've been going on and on in this retrospective about the history of these games and the big deep lore behind each of these characters, so some of you might think, oh, so you've been with this series since the start. Nope, I didn't touch King of Fighters until 6 years ago. Don't get me wrong, I had always heard about King of Fighters. Throughout my entire life, whenever I was geeking out about Street Fighter or Marvel or Tekken or Mortal Kombat, there was always that one kid in school or that one guy at my job or that one guy at the arcade or the game store who told me, you need to check out King of Fighters. That's the game all you fighting game fans out there need to be checking out. Well, in February of 2016, Street Fighter V, one of my most anticipated games of the year, was released, and it was so underwhelming. Where were all the characters? Where was all the single-player content? It didn't even have arcade mode! The launch version of Street Fighter V was like eating a bread sandwich. It was just so bland and uninteresting with nothing in there. Well, cut to a few months later, and I'm still feeling disappointed in Street Fighter. None of the DLC has excited me, that free story mode stunk. This big new installment in one of my favorite series just left me feeling so empty. And then, all of a sudden, a brand new King of Fighters releases, and I thought, you know what? I've got a Hadouken-shaped hole in my heart right now, and I've been told a dozen times in my life that this is a series that I need to check out, so screw it, I'll give it a shot. And I was instantly won over, and part of that was because, holy crap, 50 characters! So many new faces, each of them with their own unique personalities and styles and backstories. It was like diving into a brand new world. Yasuyuki Oda said that this game needed 50 characters in order to bring an audience in, and, well, I can't speak for everyone else, but it sure worked on me. And after playing it, I would spend the next 6 years delving deep into this franchise, learning all the characters and the stories and the mechanics. This is the game that made me a King of Fighters fan. Now, as for how the game plays, well, this was the start of a brand new saga for KOF. A brand new storyline was beginning, meaning that it was time for them to change the gameplay up once again with a whole new gimmick. And this time around, the big crazy new mechanic was nothing. Well, okay, that's not fair. There were definitely some new mechanics and some adjustments made to the old mechanics, but nothing that felt like this is the thing that makes this storyline unique. The Nest Saga had strikers, adding a fourth character to your team. The Ash Crimson Saga allowed you to switch between your teammates in battle. These are big changes that instantly make you realize how different this new Saga is. But the changes this time felt far more subtle, like they weren't here to be some big flashy new gimmick that you could play around with, more of just natural adjustments made to the gameplay. Now, if I had to pinpoint the three biggest changes, first off would be EX moves return from the last game and Max mode return for the first time since 2002, but now EX moves no longer consumed your meter. Instead, you could only do them while in max mode. You can also now activate max mode right after connecting a normal hit to reset your combo, which can lead to some really big damage, if you can pull it off. Yeah, this ain't like Roman cancels in Guilty Gear. The timing linking your normal attack into a max mode activation into a new combo is crazy tight, and you have to move your fingers quick. But it is still a cool new feature. Next up, every character still had supers that used up 1 bar of meter, but if you hit 2 buttons when you did the super instead of 1, then you would do a more powerful level 2 version of that super. And in addition to that, every single character had a big cinematic level 3 super. So just to remind everyone, there were 50 characters in this game, and they all had multiple level 1 supers, level 2 versions of those supers, and big cinematic level 3 supers, all of which were made from the ground up, and they did all of this in 2 years with no staff and no budget. Just making sure we all realize that. But here's where it gets really nuts. Remember in KOF 13 how you could cancel your supers into your Neomax supers? Well, now you could cancel any super into a higher super. So you could cancel a level 1 into a level 2, a level 2 into a level 3, or a level 1 into a level 3. And unlike the Neomax, there was no second gauge that you had to fill up in order to pull this off. No, if you had the meter for it, then you could just do it. And you might be thinking, wow, canceling multiple supers into each other that cost multiple bars in order to pull off? That must eat up your meter. Yeah, it does! But guess what? Like in most King of Fighters, whenever a character on your team is KO'd, the max number of meters that you can build up increases, going from 3 to 4 to 5. But for the first time since King of Fighters 98, if your character is KO'd, they don't just give you an empty bar meter, they fill it up for you. Yes, every single time that a character on your team is KO'd, you get a free bar for super. And it is insane to me that it took this series almost 20 years to go back to this mechanic. Not only does it give you more resources to help you make a comeback after your character is knocked out, but also it puts so much more importance on the order that you arrange your team in. If you know you have a character that you would be best with when they have a lot of meter to use, put them last, and the game will give you a lot of meter to use. And the third big adjustment to this new KOF was probably the most controversial: auto combos. Yes, now if you just mash on the light punch button, you instantly do a combo that ends with you doing a super move. And I know that some people hate this because the topic of auto combos is kind of a hot button issue in the fighting game community. Personally, I don't have a problem with it. I know people say that you shouldn't put auto combos in a game because they're not that good and you don't do a lot of damage, and you're right. So don't use them. If you want to be good at fighting games, you shouldn't just be mashing on the light punch button anyways. But at the same time, not everyone wants to be good at fighting games. Some people just want to do some cool stuff with their characters, mash on some buttons, have some fun for a few hours in arcade mode, and hey, that's perfectly fine, nothing wrong with that, and auto combos get the job done for that. So if it makes casual fans feel good and competitive fans wouldn't be using them anyways, I'm okay with it. In fact, these auto combos do lean into a design objective that Oda had. He said that he wanted to make this game simpler for new players, but not like KOF 12 where they just boiled the game down to the basics. No, you've heard all the crazy moves that you can link together, you've heard about the EX moves and the multiple level supers and max modes. This game can still be crazy complex. But KOF was always known for overly complicated inputs, and these inputs are definitely easier. Unless you want to play as Angel, she's still a technical nightmare. What angry god did we offend to get a moveset like this? Now, as for how the game feels, I think it's great. It isn't quite as fluid as King of Fighters 13, and your maneuverability doesn't feel as high. In fact, it feels a little stiff at times, like earlier King of Fighters. But even with that, it still feels great overall. Canceling from one super into another was a great addition to this game. I love how the camera zooms in whenever you do a level 2 super, and even your basic 2 or 3 hit combos still feel like they have an impact to them. But if we're talking about the feel of the game, we should also talk about the presentation. Yes, I know I have already said that this game doesn't look very good, but that's the graphics. And while the game's graphics are low, the presentation is high. I mean, for starters, yes, the characters look bad, I know, hot take. But look past the characters at the backgrounds. I've said this many times before, but I think King of Fighters has some of the best backgrounds in fighting games, and even with this limited budget and crappy graphical engine, I still think these backgrounds are really damn good. This aquarium where you see fish swimming all around you has this magical sense to it. The Mexico stage is exploding with life. The South America stage? This thing is gorgeous. I want to visit this stage in real life. And the Japan stage just oozes hype with the big title card in the background and the bright, vibrant city lights. And beyond the visuals, the music is top notch. This is another one of those games that I will put the soundtrack on and just let it rock. There are so many great tracks in here. The Team Japan track is a poppy salute to their previous themes. Kim's theme has this rising, energetic, adventurous sound to it. And the opening song, Follow Me, this thing was stuck in my head for like 2 years after playing this game. To this day, whenever I think of King of Fighters, the very first thing that comes to my mind is... And to go that extra mile, when specific characters fight each other, there will be unique music just for their match. That's such a great touch to make these matches feel special and really add emphasis to the relationship that these characters have with each other. And they didn't have the budget to create a lot of bonus material for this game, so Yasuyuki Oda went into the SNK vault and pulled out every piece of existing art he could find for the gallery. You could play this game for a year straight and still not unlock everything in the gallery because this thing is huge. Oda knew if you can't make something new, then recycle as many old assets as you can, and it worked. This gallery is really impressive. And in King of Fighters 13, every character had unique opening dialogue with every other character. Well, they couldn't possibly have written that much dialogue for this game, but they did create some unique exchanges between specific characters. And I kind of prefer this to 13's dialogue. As I said in the last episode, the exchanges in 13 are good, but since every character had to have something to say to every other character, a lot of these exchanges just ended up being really repetitive. And also considering the fact that you see them before every single match, even if they were that interesting, eventually I just ended up skipping them. But in here, each exchange actually feels special. They're all fully voiced, and they're either good character work letting us learn more about these characters and what they think about each other, or they're just genuinely funny bits. I actually got a good chuckle out of several of these.
Round 2.
Okay, in context, that's hilarious, trust me. And speaking of these fighters, it's about time that we actually talk about them. This game had 50 characters in it, 16 full teams, and 2 unlockable bosses, so we got a lot to cover here. First up, the basics. Team Japan returned with Kyo, Benimaru, and Daimon. Team Fatal Fury is once again Terry, Andy, and Joe. Team R Fighting is Ryo, Yuri, and Robert, with Robert now undergoing a major makeover and looking like Orlando Bloom. I guess he got tired of everyone comparing his hair to Dan Hibiki's. Team Psycho Soldiers is the classic Athena, Chin, and Sai Kinzu, now once again wearing his Jackie Chan inspiration on his sleeve. The Ikari Warriors is unchanged with the standard Ralph, Clark, and Leona. Team K-Dash is K-Dash, Kula, and Maxima, who is now leaning way harder into his cyborg side. Wow, it's almost like something over the past few years suddenly made Metal Men with glowing armor really popular. I wonder what it could have been. It's a mystery. Team Yagami is also the same from the last game, with Iori, Mature, and Vice. At the end of King of Fighters 13, Iori chose to take back his family's sacred treasure, giving him his flame powers again, but also linking him with Orochi once more. So once again, the spirits of Mature and Vice come back from the grave to tell him that they can sense other spirits are starting to rise up, and it's all revolving around this new KOF. We'll get back to that later. So that's a good selection of returning faces, but as for the rest of the cast, KOF 14 introduced a ton of new characters, more than any other King of Fighters game. And I've heard a lot of older King of Fighters fans say that these new characters were letdowns, they say they didn't fit, they say they weren't as good as the older characters. But speaking as someone who went to KOF 14 fresh and didn't have the nostalgia of previous games, I would like to present you with a segment that I call, The New KOF Characters Are Good, You're All Just Mean. For starters, there's the new Team Women Fighters made up of King and Mai, but the third spot was now the new character, Alice Nakata. Now, if you watched our Fatal Fury retrospective, then you might remember Alice. She's a Terry Bogard superfan who wants to prove that she can fight too, so she uses a clumsy combination of moves from the other Fatal Fury fighters. Basically, she watched Terry, Andy, and Joe, and she's trying to imitate how they fight. I think she's fun. I mean, I like Sakura, I like Terry Bogard. Alice is just Terry Bogard Sakura. Works for me. Although, we do have to bring this up, Alice didn't come from any of the Fatal Fury games. No, instead, she came from the Fatal Fury Pachinko machines. And they made sure that she wore that origin story on her sleeve because whenever she attacks, she causes Pachinko tokens to come flying out, and I hate it. In fact, there are actually a few Pachinko characters in this roster. Remember, this game began development in 2014, a year before SNK shut down their Pachinkos, and I have to wonder if they were forced in this game by SNK's bosses to try and advertise their Pachinkos? Or did Yasuyuki Oda want to carry on the tradition of KOF being a crossover game and wanted to include some new SNK characters? But since SNK had only made Pachinko games for the past 6 years, this was all he could pull from. Next, Chang and Choi returned, but not with Kim Kapwan this time. No, Kim thought his two students had done pretty well with their training, so he decided to give them a week-long vacation, during which they got drunk and destroyed a bar and got arrested. They were then sent away to a prison so vile that the prisoners basically ran the place, and they met up with one of the world's most lethal criminals, a mysterious man named Xanadu. And Xanadu is... well, he's nuts. Everything that he says sounds like he ate a bad edible and he's seen through space and time, but thanks to these visions, he feels something is going to happen at this year's King of Fighters. So he recruits Chang and Choi for his team because yes, anyone can compete in KOF, including incarcerated prisoners. And I will say, as much as I never liked Chang and Choi, they're actually not that bad in this game. Xanadu, on the other hand, yeah, this guy is consistently ranked by fans as one of the worst KOF characters. And I said I think people are way too mean on the new characters in this game, and they're actually pretty good. But I'll agree with you guys on Xanadu. Yeah, that guy, he's got problems. Now, when Kim learns that his two students ran off with some criminal and they're joining King of Fighters, he puts together Team Kim to go and stop them. And joining him was his master Gong Il. Yes, after all this time, we finally got to meet Kim's master, and I bet you're expecting him to be some stoic, ancient, wise teacher. Nope, Gong Il is a short, stocky Korean Danny DeVito who loves to travel the world indulging in life's pleasures. In the King of Fighters 14 manga, there are multiple moments where he just starts reminiscing about the wild parties he's been to and all the ladies he's hooked up with. Kim still believes he's a righteous pillar of justice though, but every time that Kim goes on about justice, Gong Il just sighs and goes, "Oh god, kid, listen, justice is important and all, but you're taking this way too seriously, kid." And to really drive this divide home, the third member of Team Kim is Gong Il's new girlfriend, Luong. She's a tall, super flirty beauty who is constantly making Kim feel uncomfortable with how forward she is, and I love this. After 20 years of Kim punishing Chang and Choi, it feels so fun to see Kim being the one who's getting tormented by his teammates. It's a very nice change in roles. As for how Luong plays, she uses a lot of deadly strikes that go for the kill, and she has super long legs that strike quickly and almost seem to stretch out. So she fights almost like an assassin, and her limbs can extend. Yeah, it's never been confirmed, but it is heavily rumored in the fan base that she's actually somehow related to Duo Lon and the Hizoku. Next up, one of the wildest new teams. I've talked before about how King of Fighters was a massive success in Mexico and Latin America. So for King of Fighters 14, they wanted to celebrate this fan base by creating a brand new team, Team Mexico. They were made up of Ramon, Angel, who was sick of living on the run and thought that this team sounded like a fun alternative to fighting off former Nesgoons, and their final member, the brand new character, King of Dinosaurs. The King is a heel wrestler who wears a giant dinosaur mask, and he is one of the darkest, most sinister wrestlers known to man. A true monster whose heart is so black that no light can escape, and a complete mystery. No one knows what malicious, sinister mind could possibly be behind that mask and all the evil that it represents.
ガリフォン久しぶり久しぶりいやそのようなやつは知らん私は恐竜キングオブダイナソーああそうだった悪い悪いそれじゃ無敵で行くぞほら
Except for Terry Bogard, who doesn't know how to keep his big mouth shut. Yes, King of Dinosaurs is actually T-Zoc, the stoic, heroic wrestler of justice, who after being beaten by a boxer was so ashamed that he decided to turn to the dark side and became King of Dinosaurs. And I love this, because T-Zoc was a great hero and he is a horrible villain. I love the joke that he's trying to be a villain, but he has no idea how to do it. He's always trying to think of what a villain is supposed to do, but just results in him being a big goof. And the fact that he thinks no one knows who he is, but everyone knows who he is, it's so good. But who was it that defeated T-Zoc and sent him down this new path? Well, to find that answer, we go to another brand new team, Team South America. There's Zarina, a dancer who fights to raise money to save the forest where her pet toucan Coco came from. Then there's Banderas, a master of his own brand of Brazilian ninjutsu. When he was a kid, he was given a book on Japan by a tourist and he became obsessed with it. Or more accurately, with the fictional version of Japan that he read about in the book. Yeah, he's basically someone who watched too much Naruto as a kid and then he trained to become a ninja. But hey, for a self-trained fanboy, he's actually pretty sick. He's got hell of an Azuna drop. And lastly, their leader, Nelson. He was a world-famous boxer, but when he got into a car accident, he lost his arm and his girlfriend wound up in a coma. But luckily, a super nice high-tech organization offered to give him a brand new robotic arm and pay for his girlfriend's recovery if he agreed to fight in the King of Fighters on their behalf. And it's exactly who you think it is. Seems some remnants of Ness survived and they've been rebuilding in the shadows, and they've set their sights on Nelson to be their new golden boy. I really like Team South America. I love their personalities, with Banderas trying way too hard to be an anime character, and Zarina kicking millionaires in the nuts to try and save the environment is always appreciated. I would love to see these characters return, but maybe rename them. Yeah, this was one critique that the team got that I do agree with. They were called Team South America, but Nelson and Banderas are from Brazil, and Zarina is from Colombia, but then she ended up moving to Brazil. So that isn't really Team South America, it's more of just Team Brazil. It would be like if you made a Team Europe, but all three members came from France. But still, love the characters, just change the name. Now, time for a big returning face. Next up is Team Southtown, featuring Billy Kane, the brand new character Hein, and Geese Howard. Yes, Geese Howard was now back for the first time in a canonical King of Fighters since 1996. Think about that! Geese Howard is one of the biggest villains in fighting game history, and he's been a constant presence in multiple KOF storylines, but this was only his second playable canonical appearance in a game. KOF 98 was a non-canonical dream match, KOF 2002 was a non-canonical dream match, KOF 11 was a non-canonical unlockable character on the home port, KOF Maximum Impact was KOF Maximum Impact. If you're a more casual KOF fan, then Geese popping up in here might not seem like that big of a deal, but for the big lore nuts who dig deep into these stories, this was really special. He signed up for the tournament because his sacred scrolls said that a source of great power would appear at this tournament. By the way, if you play through the Fatal Fury games, then you know Geese really likes sacred scrolls. This is like his third plotline revolving around them. And joining him, as I said, is Billy Kane and the new character Hein. Hein is Geese's butler, and he is a total mystery. We don't know anything about him. But you can tell there is definitely more to this guy than he's laying on. There appears to be something dark behind those glasses. Heck, the very first time that I saw his level 3 super where he uses some kind of a gravity power to crush you, I seriously thought it was going to be revealed that he was some kind of a demon. Like, maybe it's just me, but this is one of the most malicious looking level 3 supers in the whole game. Next, one of the most interesting new teams, Team Another World. This is a collection of 3 fighters who, as the name implies, all come from other realities. Nakaruru, a priestess from feudal Japan who is one of the big faces of the Samurai Showdown franchise, uncovered a crack in reality and sensed an evil presence from within it. This led her to several other realities where she found Moi Moi and Love Heart and got them to agree to help her stop whatever this evil is, leading them to the King of Fighters universe. I really dig this team. They do feel kind of out of place with the rest of the King of Fighters world, but, well, that's literally the point of their team. Moi Moi is a spunky young tomboy who likes to fight and is obsessed with food, and Love Heart is a badass sky pirate, and I don't know much more about her beyond that, but I grew up playing Skies of Arcadia, so hey, I'm always in favor of sky pirates. And in case you're wondering where these two originated from, just like Alice, they originated from 2 SNK Pachinko games, Sky Love and Dragon Gal. But unlike Alice, their two pachinko games and all the characters revolving around it were sold off to Highlights Entertainment in 2015 when SNK quit the gambling business, meaning we probably won't be seeing them anymore after this point. Dang it, SNK, even when you quit the pachinko business, you still screw something up. Next up is Team Official Invitation, named that because this team was brought together by the host of this year's tournament, and boy, if you thought Team Another World was an odd collection of characters, you haven't seen anything yet. You got Mian, a master of martial arts and Sichuanese Chinese opera dancing. She's obsessed with money, but only because she's trying to pay off her family's hospital bills, and even though she can come off as pretty abrasive and upfront, in actuality, she's very shy and she hates showing her face. So she swapped her mask in out to show whatever emotion she's feeling at the moment. In fact, speaking of that, I said earlier that 3 characters in this game had their faces in so that way they wouldn't have to program in facial animations, and as you can guess, Mian is one of them, but she still swaps her mask out with every single attack. Damn, even when they're crunched, the SNK devs put in the work. Next is Sylvie Palapala, who I am 100% convinced is the most controversial new character in this roster. Some people love her and some people hate her because of her total oddball personality and her way over the top design. She's actually based on the real-world idol Kyari Pamu Pamu, who is also famous for being quirky and wearing elaborate outfits. Now, how do I feel about Sylvie? I honestly really disliked her when I started playing this game. She was one of my least favorite characters. But then one day, after I learned far more about these characters and about the lore of King of Fighters, I was playing through this game and I saw this exchange between her and Angel, where basically Angel says, "Wait a minute, do I know you? No, I don't think we've ever met. No, I remember you. Yeah, you were that nerd from Nest. What? No, I'm Pop Idol Sylvie Paula. I don't know what you're talking about. No, you're totally that loser from Nest. What up, nerd? Here with your nerd friends? Get over here so I can shove you in a locker, nerd." And then I realized, wait, Sylvie's big crazy personality and these insane outfits, they're not real. She's just some reject experiment loser from Nest who is dressing this way because she thinks it'll make her cool. I love that. That's great. Yes, Sylvie was a failed Nest experiment who escaped, saw Athena performing on TV, and decided, I want to do that too. So she basically just dresses up in whatever she thinks an idol outfit is supposed to be. And apparently the whole idol thing didn't really work for her, so instead she just decided to join illegal underground fight clubs. So, yeah, I've come around on Sylvie. I actually like her now. And the final member of this team was Kukri, a shadowy mystery man who can control sand and is basically the most edgelord of edgelords. He's like if Reddit comments came to life and were given a human shape. He insults everyone around him, has an absolutely filthy mouth, and an even filthier mind, as he is actually the final boss in the fighting game SNK Heroines Tag Team Frenzy, where he kidnapped several female SNK characters and Terry Bogard for some reason, and used some kind of dream magic that he apparently now has to put them into skimpy outfits and make them fight each other for no reason other than that he is a big perv. I wouldn't bring this up if I didn't have to, but apparently that game is actually canon in the KOF universe, so it is kind of necessary to bring it up when talking about him. Also, he has some kind of a connection to the big mystery villain of the whole game, but after what I just described in SNK Heroines, you've all probably stopped listening. That means we only have one team left, and at this point you're probably wondering, hey, wait, isn't this the start of a new KOF storyline? So that means there's a new hero. So who is it? Well, to find that answer, we turn to Team China. Kind of. This team is made up of Terry Bogard and Geese Howard's old master, Tung Fu Ru, making his very first canonical appearance in the games. And he is joined by his 2 new students, Matinkun, who is really sleepy. And that's kind of it, but hey, that's relatable, and he uses sleepiness as a drunken boxing style of fighting, which is actually a cool idea. And then there's Tung's other student, Shune, and Shune was the new hero of this saga. Kind of. Yes, one of the reasons that SNK kept making new heroes for King of Fighters was because they knew that they would have multiple games to dedicate to them. But King of Fighters creative director Isuke Ogura would later admit that when they were making King of Fighters 14, they didn't know for sure if they wanted Shun'ei to be the new hero, and I have to assume it's because at this point in time, they didn't know if there was going to be a King of Fighters 15. I mean, this was a huge gamble. SNK still really did not want to get back into making video games. If this game flopped, then that was it. So Shun'ei is on the box art, and his powers do tie into the big villain of the game in some mysterious way. But that's about it. So far, he doesn't really have much more importance beyond that, and the story doesn't even really seem to center around him. Also, I should point out that a lot of people have theorized that Shun'ei was made the new hero of the saga because SNK was bought by a Chinese company, so they told SNK to make the new hero a character from China, but that's not true. Remember, King of Fighters 14 began development a whole year before Lato Millennium bought them up, so they had nothing to do with the creation of this character, they had nothing to do with him being the new hero of the saga, this was all just a big coincidence. Now, I'm sort of torn on Shun'ei, and from what I can tell, so are a lot of KOF fans. He has some pretty cool powers, being able to create giant JoJo stand hands, and I dig his backstory. He lost control of his powers when he was a kid, and he was adopted by Tung Fu Ru and spent several years trained to make sure he never loses control again. I also dig the whole brotherly relationship between him and Matenkun, and he's also got a pretty good personality. He grew up living far away from civilization, so he's got borderline agoraphobia. In the manga, you even see him get a panic attack from the audience in the stands, all talking and looking at him and judging him all at once. But he still wants to learn about the outside world and rejoin it. And he actually finds that he can get over his emotional issues by pushing himself to fight harder and meeting these other strong fighters. That's pretty cool, that's actually a unique personality for a fighting game protagonist. Problem is, none of that is in the game. Yeah, you get all that in the KOF 14 manga. In the KOF 14 game, pretty much all of his interactions just make him feel like an edgy, angry teenager who just has this whatever attitude about everything. I hated this kid when I played the game. But, as I said, when I ended up reading the manga, I thought he wasn't bad. I thought it was alright. Although there is the elephant in the room. His outfit. Yikes, this is one of the busiest character designs I've ever seen. Originally, like the other new characters in the game, Shun'ei was designed by Isuke Ogura, and apparently he looked far more like your stereotypical fighting game protagonist. But then they brought together some younger artists and told them to make Shun'ei look cool and attractive to female audiences. And yeah, after hearing that, this design made a lot of sense, because it just screams multiple people had a say in this and they all had different ideas. Shun'ei has 7 points of interest: green hair, headphones, tie, jacket over the shoulders, giant bead chain, wrap bandage gloves, and the one pants leg rolled up. None of these are bad on their own, but when you put them all together, it's so busy and clunky. None of it fits together. You could pair 2 of them together. Heck, I'll even give you 3. You could have any 3 of these together and it could still work, but all 7 at once? It is way too much going on in too many different directions. But I guess it does kind of play into his backstory. The headphones actually help him tune out the world, which helps with his agoraphobia. And considering that he lived away from society all of his life, I can see him walking into town, seeing a fashion magazine, and just deciding to put on everything that he sees all at once because he thinks that's what's popular. At least, that's my headcanon of what happened, I'm sticking with it. So, that's your full starting roster for King of Fighters 14, and as I said, I know older KOF fans had problems with this cast, but I really dig the collection of characters that they brought together. Don't get me wrong, I didn't like everyone. Xanadu can never return, I'd be fine with that. But for the vast majority of these characters, I really like this roster. And even after spending the last 6 years going back and playing the older games and getting deeper into their backstories and their lore and seeing all the different characters that got brought together in every single installment, yeah, I still like the majority of these new characters, and I think they could easily stand next to the rest of the KOF cast, and they deserve to return. But that's just the cast. What about the story? As I've said over and over, KOF stories set them aside from all the other fighting games out there. They put so much more importance and attention on their storylines that built up from one game to another. So what was the plot of this brand new storyline? Kind of nothing. No, seriously, there really isn't that much of a plot to this game. At least not at first. Again, remember, this game was being made with no idea of whether or not the King of Fighters would continue on after this, and SNK was not supporting a whole line of manga to flesh out this story before it was released. But the plot is that the King of Fighters tournament hasn't been held in several years because thanks to those tournaments always causing massive destruction, no one wanted to touch them. I have to believe that plot was put together specifically designed to be a metaphor for what had been going on at SNK. So, with no one wanting to host the tournament, a billionaire named Antonov buys the rights to the King of Fighters for cheap, declares himself the one true original King of Fighter, and opens the tournament back up, telling everyone to come challenge him for the belt. And I'm gonna go ahead and say this right now. Antonov is easily my favorite boss in the King of Fighters series. Is it because of his moveset? No, his moveset is actually pretty basic. He's just a generic big punch man. The fight against him is pretty bland when you get right down to it. No, I love Antonov solely for his personality. Because Antonov bought the rights to the King of Fighters and put on this big tournament because behind all the glitz and glamour, behind all the celebration, Antonov's true goal, the real reason he's resurrected the King of Fighters and is bringing all these strong competitors together, is because he just wanted to host the King of Fighters and put on a good show for everyone. Yeah, that's it! After 14 games, Antonov is the first person to ever host the King of Fighters, not for any secret ulterior motive. Hell, aside from Chizuru in King of Fighters 96, he's the only person to host the King of Fighters, not for any secret evil ulterior motive. No, Antonov just wants to treat the world to a good show, and deep down, he's just a big lovable goofball. I love the cutscene that you get halfway through the arcade ladder when you see this big brawny muscle man tearing up watching a sad movie about a boy and his dog. It's so endearing. And Antonov isn't some kind of Hercule Mr. Satan character who just accuses everyone else of cheating because they have superpowers. No, he sees your fireballs and he says he'll beat you fair and square. Actually, I stand corrected. It's not fair. Because he gives you the advantage. He might have bought the title King of Fighter, but he still goes up against you 3-on-1. And I mentioned earlier that he put together Team Official Invitation to enter the tournament. Was it so that way they could wipe out all the other fighters, make it to the championship, and then take a dive against him so that way he could remain the champ? No, he did it to ensure that that way there would be at least one strong team in the tournament so everyone at home could get a good show. He's probably the most genuinely nice boss in fighting game history. Heck, on the list of his dislikes, it lists people who are mean to their pets. It is impossible to hate this guy. And when you beat him, does he accuse you of using tricks and cheating? No, he does the honorable thing and he agrees to give you the belt. But then we remember this is a King of Fighters game and there is never just one boss fight. Yes, now is when the actual plot of the game comes into play. You remember that big interdimensional evil that Nakaruru was chasing? Well, that evil needed something to pull it all together and make it take a physical form. And if you have made it all the way to part 4 of this retrospective, you know what that something was. Fighting energy. All the strong competitors coming together caused this evil to be drawn out and form into a human shape. This is Verse, the true final boss. And what exactly is Verse? Well, you remember how at the end of the Ash Crimson Saga, Ash destroyed his ancestor, and that erased Ash himself from the timeline? But if you destroy your own ancestor, and that erases you, then who destroyed your ancestor? Yeah, that's the kind of thing that creates a paradox, and the space-time continuum doesn't like paradoxes. That's what shattered the fabric of reality, which allowed this creature made up of the ghostly souls of the dead to break through into our world. I'm always a fan of when one game storyline has an effect on what comes after it, so it's nice to see that even though there had been a 6-year gap since the last game and this was meant to be a jumping on point, the effects of the last game weren't being ignored. Now before the fight, you get a cutscene of Verse attacking the stadium, raining fireballs down, destroying everything, and Antonov gets taken out when he jumps in front of a kid to protect them. Again, just an all-around good dude, that Antonov. You also get introduced to Clemens Bellamy, a reporter who covers the King of Fighters, who lets you know he's reporting at a great risk. And man, I love Clemens Bellamy. I've been applying KOF this whole time for how it builds up its world, and the idea that this universe has its own Lois Lane, a reporter who specifically covers King of Fighters, it just makes it feel more real. With how much crazy world-ending stuff goes on at the KOF, of course they would have a dedicated journalist. Plus, Clemens Bellamy is the perfect fake reporter name. Now, 4 teams have unique cutscenes before the fight. Team China, Team Japan, Team Another World, and Team Official Invitation all get unique scenes showing their reactions to Versus arrivals, with Shune's powers acting up in response to Verse, and Kukri saying that this is the moment he's been waiting for. My, how mysterious. I hope they go into further details about that in a later game. But this is another thing that I love about this game, and another reason I say that even though the graphics were low, the presentation was high. Having multiple cutscenes throughout the arcade ladder is something more fighting games need to do. I've said it many times, but fighting game story modes are nice, but I don't think you necessarily need them. So many fighting games say, well, we gotta make sure it has a story mode. The story mode is what sells. The story mode is the thing that everyone is coming here for. Is it though? I think that people do care about the stories in fighting games, but I think that for far less money, you could just put some cutscenes in the middle of your arcade ladder and then make a couple of specific cutscenes for every single character that you're playing, and then boom, I think that would still get the job done. It would add more replayability to your arcade mode, and it would cost you far less money. And considering that this game did not have a lot of money, I think they made the right call in here. And sure, I wish that we got more than just 4 cutscenes, but again, considering the game's budget and the production time, it's impressive that we got the 4 that we did. But now it's time for the actual Verse fight, and well, he's definitely tough, but I'd say he's around the middle in terms of KOF boss difficulty. He's got tons of variety to his movesets. He can walk towards you slowly firing out projectiles. He can command grab you from across the screen. He's got anti-airs that hit a wide range and an OTG super that can just decimate your life bar. But one thing that I appreciate about this boss is that he makes sense. He isn't broken. And what I mean by that is that many of the bosses in this series are low with big crazy moves that don't seem fair. But while Verse might whoop your butt a few times, everything he's doing makes sense. I never look at him and say, oh, that's just cheap. No, I look at him and I say, damn, that was a cool combo. And there's a reason for that. Verse is one of the only bosses in KOF history who is unlockable and playable in the game that he was introduced. So they didn't design him to be some big unstoppable wall, they designed him to be playable. So when he's kicking your butt, he's doing it with legit combos and meter management that you, the player, can learn to do. After you defeat Verse, he explodes, sending waves of energy across the world. And Clemens Bellamy reports that Antonov is alive and rescue workers are arriving at the scene. He then ends with another moment that I can't help but feel is meant to be a metaphor. He says, to our viewers around the world, we are alive. And I can't help but get a little choked up at that line, because I'm sure I'm reading way too much into this, but it feels like that line was put in there specifically about King of Fighters. After 6 years of nothing, and after SNK shut down their gaming division, King of Fighters was finally back. And I can't help but feel like when he says, we're alive, he's not talking about the characters, he's talking about this entire franchise. Again, I'm probably reading way too much into this, but I like to think that that's what the message was. We then move into the character endings, and hoo boy, are there some important developments here. As I said, the actual game itself didn't really have a whole lot of story, but the moment Verse showed up, he brought the plot with him. Because you remember how I said Verse was made up of ghostly souls of the dead? Yeah, I wasn't exaggerating. His body is literally made out of the souls of the dead. And when he explodes, it sends them back out across the world, reviving countless long-dead KOF characters. Kyo, Iori, and Chizuru all make their way to Hungary, where they find the revived Orochi crawling out of a crater. However, because Orochi wasn't created through a host body like last time, his powers are incomplete and the 3 of them are quickly able to dispatch him. I love how easily they take him out because the Ash Saga was criticized for being too similar to the Orochi Saga, so I can't help but feel like this was the writers coming in here and saying, yeah, we're not doing that again. Then in the team official invitation ending, Kukri follows one of the resurrected souls looking for someone specific, but unfortunately it's not who he was searching for. Instead, the soul he was chasing belongs to Ash Crimson. That's right, Ash Crimson was now back as well, and Kukri contacts Elizabeth Blantorch, who had been searching for him. And there were countless other resurrected fighters. So far, we still don't know everyone who has come back to life, but we do know that a few other former KOF bosses and villains were resurrected. And that was King of Fighters 14, and as I said, this was my very first KOF, so I know I've got a little nostalgia for it, but I still think this is a damn good game. This is a great installment in the series. The only real negative is the graphics. And also the really terrible netcode, but the graphics is the number one thing that most people remember. However, when you consider all the restrictions and everything going against this game, the fact that they still gave this game so much presentation such a massive roster, so many crazy new mechanics, built a brand new engine, gave 50 characters a complete moveset including full cinematic level 3 supers. It is incredible that this game got made and came out so darn good. Also, speaking of being really darn good, I've mentioned multiple times throughout this retrospective how the story of these games is largely told in the mangas, and while SNK wasn't willing to fund a manga as this game was coming out, 2 years later in 2018, they did put out King of Fighters 14: A New Beginning. And I'm not going to spend a ton of time today covering all the various KOF mangas because dear God are there a lot of KOF mangas. Like, it is insane the number of mangas that have been made and the crazy variety to them. Did you know they made an isekai starring Iori? That's real. I'm not making that one up. Your move, literally every other fighting game comic. But I should talk about at least one of them, and at the moment, King of Fighters 14: A New Beginning is the only KOF manga that has been legally translated and made digitally available, so that way you can go and purchase it right now if you want to. And I went into this book with low expectations. I've read a lot of fighting game comic adaptations, and I can count on one hand how many of them have been good and still have 4 fingers left over. But much to my surprise, holy cow, this manga is actually really darn good. Like, I am genuinely stunned by the level of quality in it. The action is incredible. These fights are gorgeously executed. The artwork is full of so much life and energy, especially the exaggerated facial expressions. There are some strong character moments with solid growth for long-standing fighters and wonderful interactions between characters, and it all leads up to an in-game level fight with all the KOF fighters going up against the souls of all the dead villains. Admittedly, the plot is nowhere near what it was in the games, though. Instead, it revolves around Geese Howard gaining ultimate power and Ness returning, but who cares if the story is different? It easily stands on its own as a good read. If you have been even remotely interested by anything that I have talked about here, you need to check this book out. Now, the support for King of Fighters 14 didn't stop with the initial release. It got a PC port and 8 DLC characters. Hydern, Blue Mary, Vanessa, Whip, Yamazaki, Oswald, bringing some Ash Saga love into this game, and then Rock Howard made his first appearance into an actual mainline King of Fighters game. Although there are still people out there who say that this doesn't count because since he was a DLC character and the DLC characters didn't have any story behind them, then this is a non-canonical appearance, but whatever, Rock finally got to be in a new game. Although that is something worth bringing up, none of these characters have any story behind them, and despite the fact that some of these characters are very important to other characters in the roster, they don't have any interactions with them. Well, there might be a reason for that. The first DLC characters came out a year after the game was released, and the second DLC pack came out another year after that. And in fighting game times, waiting a year for your first DLC is an eternity. Most fighting games put out DLC for their game within the first 3 months. Waiting 1 to 2 years just screams, we didn't plan on DLC when we were making this game. We did not know if it was going to survive, and we didn't have the budget to make extra characters. And it's a shame that they couldn't give these characters any kind of story or endings within the game, because the final DLC character was a brand new character, which means that if you didn't read up about them on the SNK website, you don't know anything about them in this game. Najd is a college student from Saudi Arabia who can summon out shadowy dragons and at night goes out in disguise and fights crime, using her shadow powers to find evildoers and punish them. She's basically a Ghost Rider-style paranormal superhero. That's pretty cool. And her design was actually submitted by fans and chosen in a contest, so that's pretty neat. But all of these characters and all this DLC wouldn't matter if the game didn't sell. Remember, this was the big gamble. This was the game that would decide not only if King of Fighters would come back, but if SNK would return to the world of video games. To say a lot was riding on this game is an understatement. Well, sales figures on the game are hard to figure out because we've now hit the point in time where most games are bought digitally, and digital game sales can't be tracked as easily. I have seen so many contradicting reports on what this game sold, so I'm going to have to do some guesswork here. We do know that in its first year, KOF 14 sold around 125,000 physical copies. In 2016, it was reported that 75% of game sales came from digital sales. So by that logic, we can assume that within its first year, KOF 14 probably sold around 500,000 copies. That's around what KOF 13 sold in its first year, and remember, that game was seen as a failure by SNK. KOF 14 was the game everything was riding on, and it could only match the last game, the game that led to SNK's collapse. So we all know what SNK was going to say about that. Yeah, they thought it was a runaway success. In the financial report for 2017, they said that the last year had been very profitable for them, and that was directly due to King of Fighters 14. But how is that possible? This game sold the same as KOF 13. How was that a failure and this was a success? Well, that was all thanks to the magic of... Yeah, wild how if you don't spend 4 years and a fortune on sprite work to make your game and then you spend the last 6 years losing money on a failed gambling enterprise, suddenly 500,000 copies doesn't sound too bad! And since that first year, the physical sales of the game have more than doubled, so it's safe to say that the digital copies have done the same, making it the highest selling King of Fighters ever. Isn't that something? Isn't it wild that if you don't immediately abandon a game and instead support it with continuous attention and content, then the sales of it will continue to grow? Weird how that works. And so it had happened. King of Fighters 14 was a success, and SNK was back. Over the next few years, they would put out multiple new fighting games, including the return of Samurai Showdown, and of course, King of Fighters 15. But before we get to that, yes folks, King of Fighters 15 is the final game so far in the King of Fighters series. With that, we will finally be up to date. But I made you guys a promise at the start of this retrospective. I said this was going to be a retrospective that covered the complete King of Fighters library. And King of Fighters has a lot, and I mean a lot of spin-offs. So before we get to King of Fighters 15 and bring this massive video series to a close, it's time for the lightning round. Time to run down all the KOF spin-offs. All of them? All of them. Well, okay. No, not all of them. I'm not going to cover the KOF Pachinko games because nothing of any importance came from them, and I'm not going to cover most of the mobile and browser games. I will cover a few of them because there's actually a couple of interesting ones in there, but a lot of them are exactly the same, and more importantly, a lot of them, and I mean a lot of the KOF mobile and browser games, popped up, existed for a week, and then shut down. Not even the SNK wiki page has anything on most of these games, and there is no footage of them online anywhere, so... Yeah, I'm just going to skip a lot of the mobile and browser games because any evidence of them ever existing appears to have been erased from the timeline, and as I said, they don't even really look all that interesting or worth noting. Also, I'm not going to cover most of the re-releases, simply because over the last 3 videos, I've kind of already talked about all the important ones. Most of the re-releases I haven't talked about yet, didn't really add anything or change enough to be worth mentioning. And remember, we're only talking about King of Fighters games, not SNK crossover games, which people like to think of as KOF games, but are in fact not. But aside from all those stipulations, yes, we're going to be covering all of them. Gonna start off where the series began, with King of Fighters 94, or in this case, King of Fighters 94 Rebound. This was a remake made for the series' 10-year anniversary in 2004 for the PlayStation 2, and essentially just took the exact gameplay from KOF 94 and retraced the sprites and made new backgrounds. There are some balance changes, but yeah, you're not going to notice them. I had to read descriptions online of what the differences were because it feels exactly the same as KOF 94, and by that I mean bad. Even the busted input reading AI is back, and I still hate it. This game never got released outside Japan, although there was an Xbox version in the works for international customers, but that got canceled in 2006 due to the game's overwhelming negative feedback, and that's not just due to the gameplay. The sprites might be retraced, but they still look severely outdated. And while I haven't been able to confirm this, apparently there are reports that the reason why King of Fighters 12 spent so much time and money on their sprites is because of how much people hated the KOF 94 Rebound sprites. So not only was this game a bomb, it also led to KOF 12. So it screwed over SNK twice. I will say I do like the cameos in the stages. Pretty much every single KOF, Fatal Fury, and Art of Fighting character makes an appearance. But if you stop and zoom in on these stages, eek. And the backgrounds are fully 3D, except you can't move in 3D. So what that means is that whenever you start up a match, the stage is just set to a random angle, which is maybe one of the dumbest executions of 3D stages I've ever seen. And if you want to know the reason why it's 3D, is because this game keeps the sidestep action from the first game rather than the dodge roll mechanic of the later games, and when you sidestep, the whole stage swivels with you. Is it normal to get motion sick from a 2D fighting game? But I will give it one positive. It does have a lengthy animated opening video, which is actually kind of nice. I dig that shows what everyone in the original roster was doing when they joined the tournament. Although this opening cutscene does reveal something that I have never been able to get out of my head, which is that apparently Mai is really short. Like, Yuri is even taller than her. Mai, have you been wearing platform heels in all the other games? I had no idea you were this short. Next, speaking of poorly received spin-offs, in the last part I said that King of Fighters 11 was the very first game SNK made on the Atomic Wave hardware. But that's not entirely true. It was the first mainline KOF game made for the Atomic Wave hardware, but SNK didn't want to dedicate a brand new mainline installment to this hardware without testing it first. So, also in 2004, man, that was not the best year for SNK, was it? Also in 2004, they put out King of Fighters Neo Wave, specifically to test the Atomic Wave, and it's essentially just a worse version of KOF 2002. It takes many of the characters from KOF 2002, but leaves out some notable ones. For example, all the characters who were made by Eolith. Yeah, remember how I said I had a feeling that SNK didn't like working for Eolith, so when they became their own company again, they just ignored a lot of the characters made for KOF 2001? That starts here. As I said, this is essentially a port of KOF 2002, but they left out Mei Li, Angel, and K49. Yeah, it does not take a detective to see the connection between these three characters. Although, I will mention that Angel and Mei Li were added back in for the PS2 port. And there is one new addition to this game. Kind of. The final boss of this game is Geese Howard, but not just any Geese Howard, it's young Geese from Art of Fighting 2. Why? I have zero idea. But apparently Geese was really tough back in his younger days because this is one of the most broken Geese Howards in any game. Heck, he's even one of the toughest bosses in KOF history. Massive specials that he just spams like crazy, perfectly timed input reading supers, and he can do so much damage that you just die instantly. Oh, and there's one other advantage that young Geese has over you. Your buttons are bugged to hell. King of Fighters Neo Wave is one of the worst received KOF games, and if you're just looking at the footage, you're probably thinking, I don't know, it doesn't seem that bad. But the second you get your hands on it, you realize, oh, this doesn't feel right. This game just decides at random whether or not it reads your inputs. I know it looks like I'm just mashing buttons, but I swear to you, I am trying to do some of the most basic super inputs and they will just not come out. And there's a new mechanic, a button called Heat Mode, that causes you to flash red, and while you're red, your life bar will drain, but you'll do extra damage. Except that sometimes it bugs out and you just don't do any extra damage, but you still lose life. And it's supposed to last until you get hit or you decide to turn it off yourself. Unless the game bugs out and just says, nah, heat mode over, it's done, go home folks. Yeah, this was SNK testing the Atomic Wave, and that's all this was, a test. But thank God they did it, because can you imagine if KOF 11 played like this? Yikes. But if for some reason you do want to play this and test it out for yourself, it is backwards compatible for the Xbox, meaning that you can still buy it digitally. Okay, so we're 0 for 2 for spin-offs, but there is one re-release that is worth mentioning. KOF 96 was the game that really started to delve deep into the Orochi Saga and started to develop the backstory of Kyo and Iori and the Sacred Treasures, and if you want to learn all about that, then you can pick up King of Fighters 96 Neo Geo Collection for the Neo Geo CD. This was essentially just a straight port of the original 96, except that it also included character bios narrated by the characters themselves, and a lengthy cutscene detailing the history of the Orochi and how the rivalry between Kyo and Iori's families began. That's actually a cool bonus for a re-release. But a remake of the first game, a game testing out some new hardware, a game that adds in some story content to it, that's the kind of stuff that you would expect from a spin-off. Let's get weird. SNK has always been a throw it at the wall and see what sticks kind of company, and that was true all the way back at the very beginning. King of Fighters 94 was released in August 1994. King of Fighters 95 was released in July 1995. And right smack dab in the middle of those two, in February 95, making it the second King of Fighters game ever released, Quiz King of Fighters. Yes, SNK had a whole line of arcade quiz games at this time, and in Quiz King of Fighters, Yuri Sakazaki has been kidnapped and you pick one of 6 playable characters to search for her, including Terry Bogard and Mai Shiranui from Fatal Fury, Ryo Sakazaki and Robert Garcia from Art of Fighting, and Halmaru or Nakaruru from Samurai Showdown. Yes, remember, this was the second game to sport the King of Fighters name. And at this point, there wasn't a big overarching plot revolving around Kyo or Orochi. No, at this point, King of Fighters was still just meant to be a crossover game between SNK properties. So none of the original KOF characters make an appearance, instead it's just a big crossover between SNK's 3 biggest fighters. From there, you roll a dice to move across the board, where you'll find random goons or guest characters from the series who you'll have to fight, which you do by answering questions correctly. It sounds like a super fun, cute spin-off to me, but it just blows my mind that this was the second King of Fighters game to come out. Meaning there was a point in time where you could actually say 50% of the King of Fighters games are quiz games. Speaking of text-heavy games that only came out in Japan, King of Fighters Kyo. This was a light novel made for the PlayStation back in 1998, set 1 month before the events of King of Fighters 97. You follow Kyo as he travels the world and get to meet up with other KOF characters, and you can even recruit them to join your team by doing quests for them. There are some turn-based battles in here, but they're not the big appeal of the game. No, this is a game for the KOF lore nuts. I've said so many times that this series does a great job of fleshing out the world and creating dynamics between characters, and that's basically what this whole game is. You get to have unique interactions and dialogue with almost every single character from the previous KOF games. You get to actually see the relationships between Kyo and his girlfriend Yuki, who up until now had mostly only been in the mangas. And we even get to meet other important characters for the first time, like Kyo's mother or Goro Diamond's girlfriend and future wife. She isn't given a name in here, but she is a professor at Osaka University. Again, I love how KOF will set up supporting characters for different fighters, then we get to see their relationships develop over different games. Like the fact that Goro gets a girlfriend in this game made in 1998, then he's gone for the next few years, then he pops up in KOF 2001 and he now has a kid. It makes you realize, oh damn, Demon has a whole life outside of these tournaments. Good for him. But if we're talking new characters important to the extended lore, this game introduced Kyo's 2 cousins. Soji Kusanagi, who was supposed to be the future leader of the Kusanagi clan, but retired because apparently there's a dark side to the Kusanagi power that he knew he couldn't resist, so he quit fighting. That's a hell of a lot of lore that the main games never bring up. And there's Soji's sister Aoi, who not only has flame powers like the other Kusanagis, but when she meets the Hizoku, the followers of Orochi, in an act of rebellion against her family, asks to join them and gains purple flames like Iori. By the end of the game, she rejoins her family, but this is still wild to me. I'll admit the number of KOF spin-off games that are canon are slim to none, but I've looked into this, and I think this game actually is canon. I mean, we met Daimon's future wife in here, it's gotta be canon adjacent at least. Which means Aoi Kusanagi may actually exist in the main KOF timeline, and if that's the case, SNK, why have you not put her in a main game? You got a motorcycle riding rebel Kusanagi with Orochi flames, how the hell has she never been playable before? Like, at least put some dialogue into one of the games about it. I would kill to have a match start with an exchange between Kyo and Iori that's just, so, how's your cousin? Oh, f*** off, Iori. Forget your fan favorite picks and your staple characters, Aoi Kusanagi for KOF 16. Give her both orange and purple flame attacks, have one attack come out of each hand, or just merge them together and make blue flames. That is some DLC I will pay for on day 1. Now, if you want to play this game, it only came out in Japan, but if you can read Japanese and you have a PS3, it is available as a PS1 classic on the Japanese PSN store. And there have been some dedicated modders slowly translating the whole thing into various different languages over the years, so hopefully one day we will all be able to experience this massive KOF lore dive. By the way, while we're talking about spin-offs focusing on specific characters, I mentioned this briefly in part 2, but Athena also got her own spin-off that was this weird cross between a survival horror and an RPG called Athena Awakened from the Ordinary Life. but personally I consider this to be more of a Psycho Soldier spin-off than a King of Fighters spin-off, so I'm not going to cover it for this video. Same thing goes for SNK Heroines Tag Team Frenzy. I know people are going to argue that this is a King of Fighters game since it's canon to the King of Fighters universe, but to me it's more of an SNK crossover than a KOF crossover. If anything, this feels more like a spiritual successor to SNK Gal Fighters, so I guess I'll save this for 2037 when I eventually do a retrospective on that series. Next up, definitely a competitor for weirdest KOF spin-off, King of Fighters Sky Stage. This is a vertical arcade shoot-'em-up where you have to rescue fighters trapped in Orochi's dimensional prison, so heroes from the King of Fighters have magically gained the power to fly and shoot out laser beams. And the first time I read that description, I literally laughed out loud. Just the image of Terry Bogard just chilling, hanging out one day, eating a burger, and then the next thing he knows, he's flying through the air shooting out Kamehameha beams. You can play as Kyo, Iori, Terry, Kula Diamond, Athena, or Mai as you battle bullet hell versions of Orochi and his followers. And hey, fun fact, remember how KOF 12 got an English dub for the characters? Well, that same cast returns to reprise their role in this game. Sadly, the English voice cast is not credited in this game, dick move SNK, but I swear Gainitz is being voiced by Patrick Seitz. And I was able to track down and find out that Kyo was played by Peter Von Gomm, who has a long-running acting career, including playing Flame Heinerd in Mega Man X7, and now I can't unhear this.
Burn to the ground! Burn to the ground! Burn to the ground! Burn!
So yes, they made an arcade shoot-'em-up featuring flying KOF characters, and why does this exist? Listen, I'll be real with you guys. I can't judge the quality of this game because I don't play shmups, so I have no idea if this is a good one or a bad one. Although, considering that the game is only about half an hour long, and yet the completion rate for it on Xbox is insanely low, yeah, maybe it's got some problems. But I just want to know why this exists. This wasn't even made during the weird SNK early experimental years. No, this was made in 2010. This was one of the last things SNK did before they closed up their gaming division. Oh, wow. Who'd have thought turning Mai Shiranui into a fighter jet wouldn't save the company? I'm shocked. The only thing I can say that makes this game worth checking out is that there's actually a lot of unique dialogue between characters that you wouldn't normally see interacting. Seeing Terry Bogard give a pick-me-up speech to Athena, or seeing what Kula Diamond thinks of Iori, this is some stuff that you don't normally get in the mainline game, so if you're into this series for the characters, there's some decent stuff in here. It's way better than you'd expect. And that brings us to King of Fighters Online, which was a MOBA set in the KOF universe made by Korean developers Dragonfly in 2013. There is not a lot of information on this out there, but near as I can tell, it included playable versions of every KOF character up to KOF 13, and they all had unlockable costumes that you could get by playing the game, but I can only find a release date set in Thailand, so I don't think it ever made much of an impact around the world. I've looked up gameplay footage of it, and I mean, it looks alright. The character models look fine, but yeah, I am not a MOBA player either, so I can't really comment on any of this. Sorry. Although it is worth pointing out that this game did introduce a brand new character into the KOF series who is only playable in this game. Real-world Muay Thai kickboxing champ Sambat Banchamek is in this game as a playable character, going under his ring name Buakaw Banchamek. And that brings us to the end of the crazy world of King of Fighters spin-offs. On home consoles, because when it comes to the handheld consoles, oh, we're just getting started. First off, two quick ports. King of Fighters 95 and 96 both got ports under the OG Game Boy, and they play... well, what do you want me to say? They're fighting games on the OG Game Boy. They weren't going to feel very good. But it is actually impressive how many of the mechanics from King of Fighters 95 and 96 they fit in here. For example, in 95 you can sidestep, and in 96 you can dodge roll, and you have your desperation moves when your life is low enough, or you can charge up your super mirror, just like in the arcade games, but I am begging you not to do that because the charging sound in these games is horrendous. Although I will admit the chiptune renditions of the classic SNK tracks are actually pretty good. But the combat is crazy quick. Oftentimes your two little pixel warriors are on top of each other and you have no idea who is doing what. But the real reason to mention these games is because King of Fighters 96, or as it was known in the West as King of Fighters Heat of Battle, included Mr. Karate as an unlockable character, And King of Fighters 95 include Nakaruru, probably as a tribute to the fact that she was cut from the original release of King of Fighters 95. And boy is she overpowered! She's got specials that can launch you into space, and when she gets low on health, she can do her desperation move, and it does over half your life, and near as I can tell, it's unblockable. And remember, desperation moves can be spammed over and over as long as you're low on health, so she can just do this infinitely. This little Falcon Priestess is mad that she got cut from the main release, and she's going to make it everybody's problem. Then, moving over to the Neo Geo Pocket and Pocket Color, SNK put out several fighting games on these charming little handhelds that feature chibi versions of your favorite characters duking it out. First up is King of Fighters R1 in 1998, which was meant to be largely a retelling of King of Fighters 97. They still use the team format of the mainline games, but the pairings are wild. You got the Saviors team made up of Kyo, Iori, and Chizuru, making this the very first time that these three were all featured as an official team rather than as a secret team. The New Faces team is made up of Yashiro, Shermie, and Chris. Then another crazy combination, Team Southtown, made up of Terry, Ryo Sakazaki, and Kim Kapwan. The only time these three have ever been on a team together. And lastly, Team Heroine, made up of Athena, Yuri, and Mai, a team you might want to remember for later. Then you also had Leona and Shingo as single entry characters, Orochi Yori and Orochi Leona as mid-bosses, Team Awakened Orochi as the sub-bosses, and then Orochi himself as the final boss. That is a very meaty selection of characters to include into a tiny handheld gaming cartridge. And even if they weren't able to include as many teams as you would normally get in the main game, they were still able to shuffle the teams around so that way it covered the whole KOF fandom. Then next year for the Pocket Color, they released R2. The sprites for this game are very similar, but they are exploding with bright colors, and the teams are changed around again with some very interesting results. You got Team Kusanagi, made up of Shingo, Kyo, and his father Shio, the only time that those two have been on a team together. Then Team New Southtown, made up of Terry, Ryo, and Mai, again, the only time you will ever see those three on a team together. The New Faces team returns unchanged. And lastly, you have Athena, Yuri, and Kasumi forming, and I swear to you, this is the actual team name, Team Super Babe. Who signed them up under that name? Was it Robert? Kenzo? Who was it? Was it Mai? It sounds like it was Mai. Then for single entry characters, you got Leona and Iori, who I am just now realizing 10 hours into this retrospective would actually make for a really cool team together. Pair them up with a third Orochi Blood character, that's a team I want to play. Aoi Kusanagi. And then once again, you got the Awakened Orochi team as the sub-bosses, and the final boss is Rugal, essentially making this a chibi version of KOF 98. Rugal even blows up his ship again, only now it's with a giant cartoony bomb, and I can't help but laugh at that. Now, this was a dream match, so there's no official story to it, but after you beat the game, you do unlock Making Mode. This is a mode that does have a story all about you going around to stop Rugal's army of clones, and in order to do that, you take any character you want, rename them, and equip unlockable moves to them to fully customize how they play. So if you ever wanted to rename Ryu, and then give him a gun, now's your opportunity to do that. I remember when I was a kid, I only knew SNK for Fatal Fury, I didn't know anything about King of Fighters, but I remember seeing these games advertising the Neo Geo Pocket Color, and I wanted them so bad. These little sprites were just loaded with charm, and compared to the Game Boy Color at the time, this combat looked so much smoother. Luckily, the second game has now been released as part of the Neo Geo Pocket Color collection, and yeah, it's actually really good. It is way better than I would expect an old handheld fighter to play. This is not nostalgia talking here. I never touched these things before this video, and it is insane how good they are. You only have 2 buttons, and yet they were able to capture almost all of the KOF moves and mechanics, and sometimes they were able to make them feel even smoother than in the actual arcade games. I was stunned how much stuff could be comboed together and how good it all felt. Like, this is not a, oh hey, it's King of Fighters on the go, gimmick fighter. No, this is a legit fighting game that actually feels good to play. I would rather play this than about half of the mainline KOF games. It's that fun. So, that was a good Neo Geo Pocket Color game. How about a weird one? King of Fighters Battle Day Paradise. This is essentially the KOF version of Mario Party, as you have to roll a dice and walk around different boards and play a variety of minigames. But you don't use KOF characters on the board. No, instead you pick 4 brand new original characters. There's the fashionable Ai, the common cool Masamune, the clumsy but good-natured Hatuko, and the hot-blooded main character type, Yuji. I'm sorry, wait. The point of Battle Day Paradise is to become the best at games, and SNK actually named the protagonist Yuji? Just wondering, but when did this game come out? And when did a certain manga about a car-loving king of games come out? Cool, just checking. Total coincidence, I'm sure. Now, even though you pick one of these 4 new characters to represent you on the board, they're not the ones who are actually playing the game. No, for that, you have to pick yourself a striker, a KOF character who will be the one that you control during certain games. They include Kyo, Athena, Daimon, Yamazaki, Chizuru, and Billy Kane. But you can also unlock Shio Kirishima, Fiolina Jeremy, Guy Tendo, and Alfred Airhawk. In case you're thinking this is the weirdest collection of characters to represent the King of Fighters, you're right, but there is actually a reason for it. These 10 characters are the secret additional strikers added to the Dreamcast version of King of Fighters 99. And you can actually link your pocket color to your Dreamcast to unlock these characters faster. Side note, I had zero idea you could link your Neo Geo Pocket Color to your Dreamcast. What a weird combination of consoles to stick together. However, there are a ton of additional KOF characters who pop up in the games, in the menus, or to sell you items, making this probably the only time I have ever seen K-Dash smiling, and oh man does that look unnatural. It feels like it's been replaced by a pod person. As for the game itself, listen, just like with shoot 'em ups, just like with MOBAs, I don't play Mario Party. But even I can tell you this is not a good Mario Party game. The boards are kind of a mess, and it doesn't really matter what you roll because every 4 or 5 spots there's a special space that instantly stops you. But what matters isn't the boards, it's the games. And I am so torn on them, because some of them are super generic, like just jumping to collect coins or yanking carrots out of the ground as Shermie. Not sure of the connection between Shermie and gardening, but okay. But when the game actually feels like it's trying to be a tribute to KOF, it is insanely charming. Trying to avoid Kim as Chang and Choi, trying to find soldiers in the grass while avoiding Leona, and the best, winding up Brian Battler to make him fly into space. This may be one of the craziest things I have ever seen from KOF, and I love it. Dang, why wasn't Brian Battler in Sky State? He doesn't even need magic powers to fly, just rev him up and he's good to go. And that brings us to the final 2 handheld KOF games, and these are 2 of the biggest, as they're some of the only spin-off games to actually create brand new characters and even establish new lore. Non-canonical lore, but lore nonetheless. I'm talking about King of Fighters EX Neo Blood for the Game Boy Advance, released in 2002. This game has a lot of fans. Out of all the spin-offs, this is the one that I got the most requests to talk about, even more than Maximum Impact. And the premise behind them is really interesting, as they essentially create a split timeline. The story of Neo Blood is that after the Sacred Treasures beat Orochi in KOF 97, Kyo wasn't abducted by Ness. Instead, he was found by a young American girl named Moe Habana. She nurses him back to health and then decides to join him in the next King of Fighters tournament. Moe fights with Jeet Kune Do, which I find very interesting because remember, K-Dash was the protagonist of the Ness Saga, and K-Dash also fought with Jeet Kune Do. But the Ness Saga didn't happen in this timeline. But our new protagonist still uses Jeet Kune Do. There's no other connection between those two, and I'm not really going anywhere with this. I just thought that was a neat little fact. Now, the teams for this game were taken straight from KOF 99, except it cut it down from 4 to 3, with the new hero team being Kyo, Benimaru, and Moe. However, there are also 6 strikers and 4 secret strikers that you can select, but those strikers aren't canon. They're just guest stars. So, a lot of the Ness characters do end up popping up in this game, just as non-canonical assist. At the end of the game, you make your way to the championship ceremony only to find an enraged Iori, as if there's any other kind of Iori. He fights you, but is able to resist the Orochi blood stirring up inside of him, at which point the true host of the tournament arrives, Geese Howard, who says he orchestrated all of this to draw out Iori's Orochi power so that way he could take it for himself. But you defeat him and he runs off, ending the game. And Neo Blood ended up selling well enough in Japan that it actually got a sequel, EX2 Howling Blood. Although I stress, it sold well enough in Japan. Outside Japan, it was kind of a flop. And as a result, the sequel did release worldwide, but almost no one ordered the English copies, making them insanely rare and super expensive. So if you want to play this game, I'd just recommend emulating it. Don't get me wrong, if SNK ever puts out an official re-release of the games, then yeah, get the official re-release of the games. But until they do that, you're way better off just emulating them. Plus, these games still have the crazy complicated SNK inputs, and have you ever tried doing pretzel motions on a Game Boy controller? Yeah, emulate it, your thumbs will thank you. In fact, I'll go ahead and say that's how I played EX2, and when using an actual controller instead of the tiny Game Boy direction buttons, it feels way better. The original EX Neoblood felt pretty stiff and clunky, which is to be expected for a Game Boy Advance fighting game, but EX2 actually feels pretty solid. So, King of Fighters EX2 Howling Blood released in 2003, and it continues the story in this new timeline, and this is when things start to get really different. The last game was just, hey, here's one new character and we're fighting geese, and that was kind of it. Now we got a whole new plotline brewing. It turns out that there aren't 3 sacred treasures. There are actually 10. Yes, when the original 3 sacred treasure families fought against Orochi hundreds of years ago, there were 7 other families supporting them with their own mystic treasures. Cut to the modern day, and Chizuru has sensed that Orochi's power is stirring again. So she gets in touch with an old friend of hers, Reiji Ugami, and asks him to go find Kyo. Reiji is another one of the 10 sacred treasures, and his family worked alongside Chizuru's back during the original Orochi War, and as a result, he actually has powers similar to hers. In fact, for a while, people actually thought Reiji was Chizuru's husband because he has a daughter who dresses just like her and shows up for all of his win animations, but no, they're just friends. Reiji finds Kyo, who is now living in America. I can only guess that after Moi rescued him and helped nurse him back to health, Kyo decided to move here to be with her, or maybe after all of his world traveling, he just really liked the States. Plus, considering he wasn't kidnapped and tortured by Ness in this timeline, he was probably actually able to graduate high school, meaning that nothing was stopping him from moving overseas. But Reiji finds Kyo and Moe and explains to them what's going on, and also reveals that Moe is actually one of the 10 sacred treasures. The 3 of them then form a new team heroes and set out to stop whoever is messing with Orochi's powers. Meanwhile, 2 other sacred treasures meet up with Iori. Miyu Kurosaki, a quiet, isolated girl who can fight with crow feathers, has lost her brother and believes he might be involved in whatever is happening with Orochi. She's looked after by Jun Kagami, a playful, adventurous grappler who acts almost like a big sister to Miyu. The 2 of them go to Iori and ask him for his help tracking down Miyu's brother, and Iori needs 2 partners to join KOF, so it's a win-win. The King of Fighters is once again held, and fighters from all around the world join in, as Kyo and Iori's teams make their way towards the championship. At which point, the host of the tournament, Gustav Munchausen, the most German villain name since Hans Gruber, greets the winners, explaining that he set this whole tournament up to gather, you guessed it, fighting energy. However, he wasn't doing this to bring back Orochi, but instead, he was trying to resurrect Gainitz. All he needed now was a vessel to put him in. That vessel? Miyu's brother, Shinobu Amau. So, now you have a fight against a resurrected pre-teen Gainitz. That's a sentence I wasn't expecting to say when I started this retrospective. But once you defeat him, Shinobu starts to fight back against Gainitz, and he ends up going berserk, awakening his own sacred treasure powers. You must now fight the berserk Shinobu, and oh, this fight! This is going next to Neo Wave Geese alongside horribly frustrating spin-off bosses. Shinobu has the power of lightning, and he has an attack that fills up half the screen, and it has a 0-frame startup. It just happens instantly, and it costs no bar, so he can just spam it whenever he wants. The second you start moving, he just nukes half the stage. Were you smart enough to block it? Don't worry, he'll do it again. But in the end, you defeat Shinobu, and you're treated to these super dramatic end credits where Shinobu's fate is left up in the air. If you play Kyo's team, then he gets frustrated and says he's done with the 10 treasures and leaves. But if you play as Iori's team, then Miyu is reunited with her brother even if he's unconscious. That sounds way more like the official ending to me. There weren't any more games after this, so we don't know which of these 2 endings is real, but it really sounds like for the very first time ever, Iori was the actual winner of a King of Fighters. I mean, again, we don't know for sure which of these 2 happened, and even if he did win, it was in a non-canonical alternate reality, so it has no impact on the main storyline, but come on, man, Iori's been finding these things since the very beginning. Let him get 1 point up on the board. But yeah, Sally, this game did not do well enough to get a 3rd installment, which stinks because we still haven't met all the 10 sacred treasures. You know they had more planned, but I can understand why it probably wouldn't have worked. I mean, can you imagine having 2 ongoing yearly King of Fighters storylines set in different continuities releasing at the same time? Okay, now imagine it's 3. Geez, SNK was insane back in the day, but I do wish that this series could have gotten some kind of a conclusion. I really like each of these new characters. I think it actually did some pretty bold stuff with the existing heroes that took advantage of the alternate reality setting. I would love to see where this story could have gone. Or if nothing else, bring some of the new characters into the main game. If they announced the next King of Fighters and they said there was going to be a Team Howling Blood or a Team 10 Treasures, that'd be awesome. I would love to see that. But okay, now we are finally done with the King of Fighters spin-offs. Just kidding, pull out your phones because it's time for the mobile games. Now, as I said, I'm not covering all of these. Heck, I'm not even going to cover most of these, because there have been more King of Fighters mobile and browser games than you think. No, seriously, take an actual guess at how many you think there are. Whatever your guess is, it's probably higher than that. Many people suggested I should give these spin-off games their own video. I could give the mobile games their own video, but I'm not going to cover all of them because many of them have had almost all information on them snapped out of existence. There was a whole line of KOF board games and sports games from mobile devices, including Mahjong and volleyball, but all I can find on them are these archive sites from years ago with these incredibly small photos. Although I will make sure to shout out Burn KOF Sports Festival, which featured tug-of-war, obstacle races, and conclude with a cavalry battle against Rugal, riding on an actual horse, and the roster of characters featured includes Heavy D. Yeah, who'd have thought this is where he would reappear? Glad to see they finally remember the character, but at the same time, it's still kind of an insult because this is a sports festival game, and they could only include one member of the American sports team. Even when these guys win, it's still kind of an insult. I had to do it one more time. Also, a lot of the KOF mobile games are just ports of other games, so there isn't really much to say there. Although I will give a shout out to a follower who wanted to make sure that I knew about them and sent me some promo posters for KOF Extreme for the N-Gage and King of Fighters for the Playphone, which is a phone I didn't even know existed until just this moment. Damn, SNK will port KOF to anything. I'm shocked you can't play it on your fridge. And for the remaining mobile KOF games that are recent and are original games, honestly, I just don't really have anything to say about them, and I haven't seen anyone in the KOF fanbase really care about them. But if you are interested, here's the lightning round for you. King of Fighters Chronicles is a tower defense game. That's all I got. King of Fighters Cross Galro Densetsu is a puzzle/card game. Neat. King of Fighters M is a tactical RPG with so many numbers on screen I think I'm going to go blind. King of Fighters 98 Ultimate Match is a tactical RPG with so many numbers on screen I think I'm going to go blind, but based around King of Fighters 98 because that game will never die. King of Fighters Encounter was a game where you fought other players you walk past. That sounds ambitious, but there was no way it was going to work. And lastly, Rhythm of Fighters is a KOF rhythm game that actually sounds like a good idea. Sucks this is an 8-year-old dead phone game. I would totally play this. However, there were 4 games that I did think were interesting enough to be worth spotlighting. Let's start with King of Fighters World. This was an MMORPG developed in China in 2017 to take advantage of the popularity of King of Fighters 14. The game is notable for 2 reasons. One is that it introduced 4 original characters to the KOF world: Miura Taka, Faith Brown, Hoshino Kaoru, and the edgiest character in KOF history, Snake. In fact, Snake is so edgy, he literally just has Iori's moveset. He is the edgelord version of an already existing edgelord. The game only existed for about 2 years, but it is worth pointing out that back in 2009, SNK tried to make another MMORPG for China, also called King of Fighters World, but it was cancelled. Only for this King of Fighters World MMORPG for China to come out 8 years later, and apparently the two are not connected at all. Nobody who worked on one game worked on the other. No elements from one game were recycled for this one. It is entirely just a crazy coincidence. Now, a King of Fighters MMORPG, that's not that weird. You know what is weird? King of Fighters Orochi Go. King of Fighters Go? What is this, a Pokemon Go ripoff? Oh my god, it is! Yes, I am not kidding you. This was an augmented reality game made in 2018, and it is totally just Pokemon Go with King of Fighters characters. It only launched in Taiwan, and the last update on the game's Facebook page was in 2019, so yeah, it's dead. But this was real. This was an officially licensed game, which just lets me know that no matter what happens, SNK will always be a chaos engine that just grabs up whatever idea it can find and goes nuts with it. You walk around and find King of Fighters characters out in the wild, and you recruit them so you can do raid boss battles against Orochi. This is insane. I literally got teary-eyed looking at footage of this because it's so stupid it's circled around to being beautiful. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, a KOF Pokemon Go ripoff? How can it get any weirder than that? Well, the answer is it can't. That's it. That's the peak of weirdness. It does not get any weirder than that. But the next game is also pretty surprising. King of Fighters for Girls, which launched in 2019. It's a dating sim where you play as a young, nameless protagonist who just started a new job at a dojo that is working closely with the next King of Fighters tournament. Over time, you get to know multiple KOF characters, grow closer to them. Listen, it's a dating sim, you know how this works. Your potential suitors include Team Kyo, made up of Kyo, Benimaru, and Shingo. Team Terry, made up of Terry, Andy, and Joe. Team K-Dash, made up of K-Dash and Maxima. Team Orochi, made up of Yashiro and Chris. Team Ryo, made up of Ryo, Robert, and oddly enough, Bao. Like, I get that you want to include a Psycho Soldier's character in here, but you just completely skipped over Kinzu and pulled Bao out of storage. Damn, Kinzu can't even get a date in a game where that's the premise. Then Iori is in there by himself, and lastly, there's Team Shinsekai, made up of Billy Kane and two brand new characters. Nagi, the organizer of this year's KOF, he's super affectionate, but very mysterious. And then there's Nagi's subordinate Yomi, who's your typical cold, distant pretty boy. The game only lasted for 2 years, but in that time it built up a strong fan base. I actually follow multiple people on Twitter who were upset to see this thing go. And hey, I'm not against the King of Fighters dating sim. You all want to make smooches with your favorite fighting game character? You have at it, go nuts. Listen, I got a couple dozen hours in Monster Prom, I get it, who am I to judge? But did you have to call this King of Fighters for Girls? I mean, it's obvious you were trying to bring in a female audience with it, but I don't know, maybe it's just me, but calling it King of Fighters for Girls makes it sound like you're saying the main KOF games aren't for girls. Like you're saying, oh no ladies, you don't want these fighting games, they're for men! Here, enjoy these dating games. That's what you like, right? Plus, who's to say a guy wouldn't want to play this game? I know some male KOF fans who would enjoy this. It's a fun idea, but there's a million better things you could have called it. That's all I'm trying to say. And the final mobile game I want to cover today is the game you probably already knew about, even if you're not a KOF fan. King of Fighters All-Stars. This game launched in Japan in 2018, but it kept growing and growing in popularity until eventually they decided to release it worldwide, and this has now grown to the point where it has become not only the most successful KOF mobile game, you could actually argue this is the most successful KOF anything. It's a beat-em-up isekai where you play as a faceless character who gets sucked into a big computer program that makes you live through the previous KOF tournaments, while occasionally gain some story involving 4 young computer programmers who are so color-coordinated you'd think they were Power Rangers. And I'll admit, I am not a fan of mobile games. There are a few I like, but typically they're not my thing. And yet, even I have downloaded this game and have put tons of hours into it. Don't get me wrong, it's still got problems. It's guilty of doing tons of those super predatory mobile game practices like giving you 1,000 different currencies and tokens and collectibles that all do different things. And this game loves its FOMO. Fear of missing out is the name of the game for KOF All-Stars. But, that being said, yeah, it's actually pretty good. The combat is surprisingly fun. There's a dozen different modes with unique objectives. It's a great tribute to the KOF series, and you can unlock multiple versions of almost every single KOF character. And they've got some killer alternate costumes for them. As someone who loves when games do Halloween events, the Halloween costumes in this game are so freaking good. Seriously, SNK, bring these costumes into the mainline KOF games. I will buy them. But the gameplay and the characters and the costumes, that stuff isn't what King of Fighters All-Stars is known for. No, what made this game famous was 2 things. First, the worst advertisement anyone has ever made for an SNK property, which I will not be showing you here. And secondly, and more importantly, the crossovers. This game has been downloaded more than 5 million times, and it's because KOF All-Stars knows how to get its name out there. It's like the cranberry of mobile games. If you got something they can mix with, it'll be there. In 2018, shortly after the game launched, they had a crossover with the anime series Gintama, a series that might not be as huge as your Dragon Balls or your One Pieces, but it still got that loyal fan following, and that got the ball rolling. Then they crossed over with Samurai Showdown, then with Tekken, then the game blew up when they crossed over with the WWE, which gave us the best interaction in King of Fighters history.
Foolish human, my name is...
It doesn't matter what your name is!
By the way, SNK, I don't know if you still have a partnership going with the WWE, but just gonna throw it out there. The New Day is already a 3-person team. Do with that information what you want. When the WWE crossover happened, I saw it spreading everywhere. People who don't even know what the heck a King of Fighter is were talking about. And from there, this game just kept going, crossing over with 7 Deadly Sins, Guilty Gear, Street Fighter. This thing is a beast and has no sign of slowing down, as they recently announced they were looking into bringing this game to the PC, and if you do that, SNK, please give this thing controller support. I don't mean just assign all your moves to random buttons on your controller like you do with your phone. No, I mean the combat is fine, but it is kind of brain dead. Let me just input the commands to do the moves so it's a little bit more challenging. That's all I'm asking for. Then also maybe tone down all the freaking announcements you load me up with every time that I log in. I know you're trying to sell me microtransactions, but I don't need 5 screens telling me what to buy before I even start the game. Okay, now, serious this time, we have finally reached the end of the King of Fighters spin-offs. And that means that we can go to our final game in this retrospective, is what I would really like to say, but unfortunately for me, they also put out some animes and a movie. Yes, if you're going to try and make the complete King of Fighters retrospective, then you can't leave out KOF's attempts to enter into other media. The first of which was a series of short OVAs called King of Fighters Another Day. We already discussed this a little in part 3, but this was a series of shorts made to promote the upcoming King of Fighters Maximum Impact 2. It featured different KOF characters in Southtown on a night when an explosion caused the city to be engulfed in flames. It's a very interesting idea, showing what different heroes are doing on that night and how it all comes together to form one story, and the animation is actually really good. If you want to check it out, you can binge the whole thing in less than half an hour, and it's been uploaded a dozen different times on YouTube, so it shouldn't be that hard to find. Although, I will go ahead and spoil one thing for you. The person who caused the fire that this whole story centers around? Ash Crimson. You know, the character who wasn't in King of Fighters Maximum Impact 2? The game these animated shorts were made specifically to promote? SNK really did not know what it was doing with Maximum Impact, did it? Well, over a decade later, in 2017, King of Fighters would once again attempt to enter into the world of animation with the series King of Fighters Destiny, which adapted King of Fighters 94, as well as the original Fatal Fury game and a few flashbacks and references to the very first Art of Fighting. And this has been a rather divisive series in the KOF community. Some people love it and think it's great, some people hate it and say it's trash. I'm kind of right in the middle. I think it's fine. It certainly isn't good, but it's got some good moments in there. Some of the fights are fun, I had a few chuckles at a couple of the jokes, and I'll admit that the majority of the time whenever this tries to be serious, it falls flat on its face, but there are a few decent moments in here, like there's one flashback episode going into King's backstory that's actually a pretty good exploration of her character. And I can't pretend like the theme song isn't a banger. I had this thing stuck in my head for a month. But while I don't think the show is bad, there is a lot of bad in here. The animation is terrible. Some of the emotional moments feel so awkward. Like there's this moment where some random kid just asks Terry to adopt him, and it's supposed to be a sweet moment, but it's hilariously corny. Also, the kid is clearly meant to be Rock Howard, but that makes zero sense with how the scene is set up, but whatever, that's the least of this show's problems. And some of the big iconic moments land like a deflated balloon. I got so hyped when Terry faced Geese on the top of his tower. Soy Sauce for Geese starts playing, the action starts ramping up, and that fight is over in 5 seconds. Also, side note, SNK, stop inventing girlfriends for Terry just so you can kill them. This is like the 3rd time you've done that. Just let him date Blue Mary already. SNK uploaded the whole series onto their YouTube channel for free, so if you want to watch it, then you can do that all nice and legal-like. Unfortunately, though, the show did not take off like SNK wanted, or more accurately, like Lato Millennium wanted to. Yeah, when Millennium bought SNK, they said they wanted to turn it into, their exact words, a Marvel-style property. And hey, KOF is actually perfect for that. I've even compared it to the MCU multiple times with how it brought all these franchises together. But this show was kind of a dud, and their dreams of an SNK cinematic universe kinda died there. Although there is a sequel film that is planned to be released later this year called King of Fighters Awakens, so we'll see how that goes. And before anyone tells me I forgot about it, yes, King of Fighters Destiny also had a mobile game. It was a beat 'em up that was, again, here for a moment and then gone. But it did feature a new playable character, Ying, who was created to be a self-insert / crossover of the famous Chinese actress Angelababy, who most Western audiences probably know from Independence Day Resurgence. Man, she must have the craziest agent in the world. And that brings us to probably the most embarrassing spot on KOF's record, and believe me, that's saying something. King of Fighters, the movie, released in 2010. And you might be thinking to yourself, I didn't know they made a King of Fighters movie, and there's a reason for that. The film was made for $12 million, and it brought in $500,000. And fighting games have had historically bad live-action adaptations, and yet King of Fighters might be the cream of the moldy crop. Because not only is this movie bad, but it doesn't even resemble King of Fighters in the slightest. Mortal Kombat Annihilation is bad, but at least it looks like Mortal Kombat. This movie opens with the protagonist of King of Fighters, Mai Shiranui, putting on the sci-fi earpiece that freezes time and transports her to the magic realm where she can fight her rival, Mr. Big, standing there with his luscious head of hair. Mai, in her iconic blue dress, is able to defeat Mr. Big with her famous lightning powers. Yeah, this was meant to be a King of Fighters movie in name only. The movie opens with walls and walls of producer credits scrolling by, and it is clear this is a too many cooks situation. It feels like every single producer had their own idea of what they wanted this to be, and this is the weird homunculus created by all of that coming together. There are some elements of the game in here. It does feature weapons dealer Rugal, here played by Darth Maul himself, Ray Parks, who is about 2 feet shorter than Rugal is in the games, but that should be the least of your critiques about Rugal's depiction in this film. And he is trying to get his hands on the 3 sacred treasures, and he's going to do that by rollerblading in a hockey jersey? Yeah, I don't even know what to say about this scene. And it does feature Kyo and Iori and Terry Bogard, except that Kyo is now a white guy, Iori is Mai Shiranui's lovey-dovey rich socialite boyfriend, and Terry Bogard is a secret government agent. Do I need to keep going? Okay, fine. The movie isn't anything like the games, but is it good as its own thing? Nope. The only thing really worth pointing out about this movie is that Terry Bogard was played by David Leitch, who would later go on to direct Deadpool 2, Atomic Blonde, and Hobbs & Shaw, and would co-direct John Wick. King of Fighters, a fighting game, had a movie adaptation that featured legendary action movie director David Leitch as an actor. You were this close, King of Fighters movie, and that is it. Seriously, we are now finally done. Sure, there is so much more that we could go over, like the audio dramas, the novels, the card games, and of course all those mangas I mentioned, or even better, the manhwas, which get really, really weird, like the KOF 96 manhwa that features not so legally distinct versions of Tekken characters. I had to find a way to sneak that in here somewhere. But no, I have to put a stop to this somewhere. We have spent far too much time in Spinoff Town. It is time to finally head into the finale of this retrospective. It is time to talk about King of Fighters 15. Since King of Fighters 14, SNK had continued to impress the fighting game community by putting out multiple re-releases of their older games, many of which used rollback netcode so that way they could play smooth online. Then they released a brand new Samurai Showdown in 2019 that was an excellent return to that series. SNK's star was finally rising again, and that meant people were clamoring for the next installment in the King of Fighters. Well, those requests would finally be answered at EVO 2019, when King of Fighters 15 was announced to be coming in 2020. Which did not happen. Now, with almost every King of Fighters, there has been some kind of a crazy backstory to the game's development, some kind of well-documented problems during the pre-production, but King of Fighters 15 is the newest game in the series, having just released a few months ago, so we still don't really know a whole lot about what went on behind the scenes. We do know that the game has staff of around 400 people, which was groundbreaking for SNK. I can't find any other game from them that has staff that big. But even with the larger staff, they still ran into problems. However, I don't think that these problems had to do with the budget, or crunch, or meddling from the higher-ups this time. No, the problems this game faced were more than likely due to the fact that they were working on this game in 2020, and 2020 was... Yeah, everything was hindered that year. Due to a global pandemic, everything got delayed as developers had to figure out a way to work remotely, and apparently that hit Japan particularly hard. I've been studying how SNK has worked, and it sounds like a very tightly knit company. It sounds like a company that relies heavily on everyone being there in the office, so they probably had to completely rearrange everything. There were probably no plans at SNK for how to work from home. King of Fighters 15 got so delayed that we didn't get any news on until the final week of 2020, the year it was supposed to be released. And even then, the news that we got was just, we'll have more news next week. Yeah, people were starting to get nervous about this game. But then, we finally got the official reveal trailer in January of 2021. And it looked great. The graphics were vastly improved. The character models looked good. The new stages were full of personality. It was overflowing with color. People were on board with this new game. And then 1 week later, we got the Shunei character trailer, and people started jumping off board of this game. Yeah, while the first trailer got people hyped up, this Shunei trailer was choppy, being cut so quickly you could barely make out anything that was happening, and out of a 45-second long trailer, less than 10 seconds of it was actual gameplay. This was not good, and it got a lot of people worried because a trailer like this meant one thing. It meant we don't actually have anything to show you yet. However, the next week, the Mitenkun trailer would be revealed, and this was much better. This actually showed gameplay that we could understand, and it looked pretty good, and it didn't feel like it was edited by someone on a sugar high during an earthquake. And this would kind of be the pattern of hype for King of Fighters 15 for the next year. Every single week, we got brand new character reveals, and we started to see what teams were going to be formed, and we started to see the new mechanics, and this was great. But then the hype would start to die down as we started to get bombarded with one trailer after another every single week, and there weren't as many surprises as we were hoping for. But then we'd get a reveal that would charge us back up again, and it just made the whole year this very strange roller coaster. There were a lot of legitimate concerns that people had about this game. About half a year of trailers went by and we still had no idea how the game actually played or what the mechanics were. Then the game ended up getting delayed again from October of 2021 till early 2022. And yes, you should delay a game until it is ready, and I'm glad that SNK did that. And it was eventually revealed by Yasuyuki Oda that the reason this final delay happened was because they were trying to put rollback netcode into the game, and that's a great reason to delay a game. You should delay your fighting game until it can have rollback netcode. Persona. But they didn't communicate that to us, which means that all the fanbase saw was a game that had already been delayed for over a year, getting delayed again. So you can imagine the narrative that started to paint for this game. And these were just the logical concerns. There were also concerns that people had that sounded insane, but they still spread so quickly that it started to poison the discourse around the game. People assumed that this game was going to have over 60 characters, despite the fact that nobody at SNK ever said that. and most of the reasons for people assuming this were based on complete misconceptions. But none of that mattered, because when SNK finally announced that this game was still going to have a starting roster of 39 characters, the third largest non-Dream Match roster the series has ever had, people still thought that sounded too small. Because they were greedy and had no concept of game development. How could it only have 39 characters? It's just using the exact same moves from the last game. It even looks the same. Except that the game wasn't using the exact same moves. It actually had a ton of balances and updates allowing for combos that were impossible in the previous game. And as for the people saying that this game looked exactly the same as 14's graphics, there's a word for those people. Liars. They are known as liars. These graphics were much better, and there was a reason for that. It's because this game was now going to run on Unreal Engine, just like Oda wanted 14 to do. And if you think that you can just drag and drop the moveset from an existing fighting game into Unreal Engine and now it looks good on its own, hi there, this is Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite. But it didn't matter if these complaints about the roster size were unfounded. There was already a swirling, growing vortex of concern surrounding this game. So when people started saying, yeah, and why aren't there 60 characters in this game? That was just another thing to add on to the pile. But then, in February 2022, King of Fighters 15 was released. And something incredible happened. Everyone just kind of stopped complaining. Because when people got their hands on it and finally got to play this game, they found that it wasn't just good, it was arguably one of the best King of Fighters ever. All that time and work had paid off. The graphics and character designs looked great, taking the art style of Isuke Ogura, the former game's illustrator and now the game's creative director, and perfectly bringing it to life. The combat did feel similar to KOF 14, but there were now so many tweaks or new mechanics that made the combat feel more creative. It provided you with more options as things could now combo together that couldn't before, and they made all the normals feel so good, so even if you couldn't pull off the big crazy life bar shattering combos, just doing 3 or 4 hits felt rewarding. The music was memorable, the supers were big and flashy, they kept the character interactions from the last game, but now they weren't these stiff side-by-side cameras, they actually felt like the characters were there talking to each other. They kept the special edit teams from previous games, except now you didn't just unlock a piece of artwork, you actually got special dialogue between your special edit teams, meaning now you can see interactions between characters who you would never see talking before this, giving you a good reason to go back and replay the arcade mode with brand new teams. And the online experience was... the online is still kind of iffy. I mean, it does use rollback netcode, so when you have a match, it plays great. But the matchmaking system is kind of bugged, so it just sort of randomly matches you against other players of any skill level, or takes forever to find a match when there are indeed people online you could be matching with. So yeah, that was a problem. But still an improvement from KOF 14. And while the unique mechanics are basically the same as the last game, again, it all feels better. It feels like they took what they created in 14 and improved everything about it. You still had max mode, but you no longer needed to be in max mode to use your EX moves. Just like in KOF 13, you could now use your EX moves at any time by sacrificing some of your meter, but now you only had to use half a bar instead of a full bar, making them far more encouraging to use. And max mode itself is so much better. In the last game, you would activate max mode so that way you could use your EX moves. But in KOF 15, yes, max mode now costs 2 bars instead of 1, so it is a higher cost. But while you're in max mode, not only are your EX moves free, but level 1 supers are also free. And your level 2 and level 3 supers only cost 1 bar. Meaning, if you do this correctly, you can go into max mode, then do a level 1, link it into a level 2, then link it into a level 3, and still have a full bar of meter left over. And when you pull this off, it is one of the best feelings in any KOF. It is amazing. And max mode quick returns, but they did one small change that makes it such a better system. In the previous game, when you activated max mode quick, it resets your combo. But the timing on it was so insanely tight. Doing an attack, activating max mode, then inputting another attack quickly enough that your opponent is still stunned from your first attack was pretty hard. But in King of Fighters 15, when you activate max mode quick, it freezes the screen for a split second to show your max mode animation. You still have to start up your new combo right after you come out of this animation, but that one tiny little freeze, stopping everything for just a split second for the animation gives you, the player, a slight moment to mentally reset yourself and confirm what you just did before continuing. And that moment for a mental reset makes all the difference. In KOF 14, to use max mode quick, I felt like I needed to be perfect. In King of Fighters 15, I feel like I just need to be good. And I am far more willing to use a mechanic I just have to be good for than one I have to be perfect for. I guess what I'm trying to say is that Max Mode Quick now no longer feels like a pro gamer strat only for top tier competitors. It now feels like a fun toy that I get to play around with. There's also a brand new mechanic called Shatter Strike. This takes the knockback or knockdown mechanic from previous games and basically supercharges it. For 1 bar of meter, you can do a hit that is loaded with armor, and if it connects to an opponent on the ground, they crumple. And if it hits an opponent while they're in the air, they wall bounce. Basically, if you know the enemy is coming in for an attack, spin that bar of meter, and they not only get countered, but they also get set up perfectly for a combo. Hitting with this is so satisfying, and if you successfully connect with it, then you gain half your meter back. So there's even rewards for using it correctly. The Shatter Strike is one of my favorite mechanics in this entire franchise. In fact, looking back at all these mechanics together, speaking of someone who has spent the last 8 months going back and replaying every single KOF game, King of Fighters 15 really feels like it just took so many of the important ideas and elements throughout the series and merged them together in a way that sure might not be perfect, but it's really darn good. But let's get to that roster. When this game was announced, they said they would be joining characters together to create some of the most interesting teams in the series history, and it's alright. They definitely could have done some more interesting stuff in here, but they could definitely have been a lot safer as well. For starters, we got Team Hero with Shune, Mitenkun, and Benimaru. Yes, Shune is now leading Team Hero because it is now official, he is the new hero of this saga. As I said, he was kind of the hero of the last game. He was certainly the protagonist of the manga, but again, that manga came out 2 years after the game was released. In the game, sure, he was connected to Verse, but that was kind of it. He didn't even win the tournament. That was Team Japan. As I said, the developers were nervous to assign a new hero because they didn't know if they were going to get a sequel, meaning they didn't know if this would be a full-blown saga. But now Shune was heading up Team Hero, and joining him and his little bro was Benimaru, who was asked by Kyo to keep an eye on him and help him learn how to deal with his powers. And Benimaru agreed because if your character is important to the plot, Benimaru is there. But what was Kyo up to? Well, after Verse nearly revived Orochi in the last game, he and the other Sacred Treasures said, okay, we need to double check and make sure that seal isn't going to break again. So Kyo, Iori, and Chizuru all finally officially formed Team Sacred Treasures. Yes, for the very first time in a mainline KOF game, the Sacred Treasures were an officially registered team. But was Orochi really likely to come back? Well, why don't we ask our next team? At the end of the last game, we learned that several dead characters were brought back to life, and first up was Yashiro, Shermie, and Chris, who were all back and ready to enter the tournament to try and resurrect their dark god, because after coming back to life, what else are you going to do but try and sacrifice yourself again? It's awesome to see these three back in a canonical game, but I'll be honest with you, I kind of wish we'd gotten a little bit more reflection from them. I mean, they sacrificed themselves to their dark god and it didn't work. Shouldn't they maybe have something to say about that? I mean, wouldn't at least one of them stand up and say, I have some questions about that thing that we just did. I don't know, maybe Giant Muscle Man and Lady Who Can't See Past Her Own Bangs aren't quite as philosophical as I gave them credit for. All jokes aside though, I actually am really happy to see them back. They are a great addition to the game. Next up, a couple of standards. Team Fatal Fury and Team Ikari Warriors remain the same as always. Team Artifying is Ryo and Robert, but now they're being joined by King, making this the first time those three have been on a team together since KOF 2000. And this leads to a very interesting team, because with King gone, Mai and Yuri need a new teammate. So they're joined by Athena. This is a team that people have been wanting forever. They're three of the biggest female characters in SNK's history, and as I said, they had all been put together on that Neo Geo game, so SNK had been continuously teasing this team since the very start. And they renamed themselves from Team Women Fighters to Team Superheroines, and thank God, because that is a way better name. As I said all the way back in part 1, I love the idea of taking whatever cool female characters from SNK you want and putting them all together on a team, but Team Women Fighters sounds like either you're trying to separate the women from the other fighters, or it sounds like a team that specifically fights women. And neither of those are good. But Team Superheroine? That sounds like we're a bunch of kick-ass ladies all working together. That is a much better name. Next, a brand new team, Team GAW, which stands for Galaxy Antonov Wrestling. After the events of the last game, Antonov was sued by everyone injured from First's appearance, and the board of directors from his old company blamed him for the big monster appearing, so he was fired and forced to wander the streets penniless with his assistant Yakov. But eventually he met Misha, the young boy whose life he saved when First appeared. Misha's family takes him in and gives him a new lease on life, and now feeling reinvigorated, Antonov joins Ramon and King of Dinosaurs to form their own team of professional wrestlers. I love this team. As I said, I like Ramon, I like King of Dinosaurs, I like Antonov, but as I've pointed out a dozen times over the course of this series, I love that KOF always gave their fighters their own collection of supporting characters, so seeing Misha continue to be part of Antonov's story really reminds me of that old KOF world building that I enjoy so much. Next up, a team we hadn't gotten since KOF 11, Team Secret Agents, now made up of Vanessa, Blue Mary, and Luong. This is one of the better teams on this roster because it's a very interesting choice for an older team to bring back several fan favorite characters, and it's a unique new combination we hadn't seen before. As for why they're all teaming up, it's all circulating around Hein. Yeah, remember Geese Howard's butler from the last game? Well, turns out Luong has some kind of a connection to him, and Mary wants intel on Geese Howard, so she figures if she teams up with Luong, she might be able to work out some kind of a deal between them. Next up, Team K-Dash returns with K-Dash, Maxima, and Whip. You might have noticed that Kula has gone missing. Well, that's because after all these years, Kula has finally grown tired of K-Dash's sass and said she's out. Yeah, K-Dash being eternally a moody, rebellious teenager was rude to Kula, and Kula being eternally a bratty kid decided to run away from home. Well, where did she go? In the biggest surprise of this entire roster, and oddly enough, an amazing way to book in this entire retrospective, Kula joined a team with Angel and Cronin. Who is Cronin? He's K9999. Yes, K49 finally returned. Just with a new name and a completely new look, which again, kind of backs up my theory that the reason K49 was removed was simply because they didn't like the way he looked or his name. You change both of those and suddenly there's no problem. Turns out that after the events of the Nest Saga, K49 changed his name to Cronin McDougal, which is a Scottish name, and I am bringing that up for two reasons. One, I would love for some modder out there to mod in an English dub to this game, just so they can give Cronin the thickest Scottish accent you can imagine. And two, and this one is just for the big KOF lore nuts out there, Chrysalid, another clone that was created by Ness, was Irish. So you put all that together, and to me it implies that Ness's home base was right smack dab in the middle of the UK, and until I hear otherwise, I'm going to assume it was located on the incredibly mysterious sounding Isle of Man. Come on, a tiny island with a name like that, you know some villain organization has to be hiding out there. But Cronin and Angel had spent the last several years traveling the world trying to keep a low profile and avoiding the surviving Nest agents hunting them down, but when Kula landed on their doorstep, Cronin couldn't help himself as he saw this as the perfect excuse to finally fight K-Dash again. Speaking of characters coming back who we thought were gone forever, at the end of the last game, Kukri found the resurrected body of Ash Crimson and informed Elizabeth about. Hey, guess what? That sounds like 3 characters to me, so let's slap them on a team together. Now, you might expect this team to be entirely about Ash Crimson, but actually, this team continues Kukri's story. In the last game, he had some mysterious motivation and it revolved around Verse. Well, we learn in this game that Kukri was an orphan who was adopted by a mystical woman named Dolores. She taught him her magical ways, including the ability to control the earth, but this caused Kukri's powers to awaken one day and they were too much for him to control, resulting in Dolores' death. Kukri then looked through his teacher's research for a way to bring her back, which is where he learned about Verse and its resurrection powers. Such a wholesome motivation for such a creepy character. You'd think he'd be all dark and sinister, but it turns out everything he was doing was to bring his teacher back. Except for the whole kidnapping a bunch of women and dressing them in kinky outfits, I don't really think that tied into his big plan. SNK, you seriously couldn't just have made an original character to be the villain of that game? Speaking of Kukri's mother, he might not have been able to find her, but she was resurrected by Verse, and she's part of our final team. Team Rivals. Yes, King of Fighters 15 continued the theme of introducing a rival to the new hero in the second game of the saga. Hydern was concerned about what the heck Verse was, so he started looking into it, and he found Dolores, a woman who had spent her life studying Verse and other magical beings existing outside of space and time, and had even been resurrected by Verse. She tells Hydern that Verse is connected to a power source, and certain human beings known as amplified specters are also connected to that power. So if they want to find Verse, they should find another specter. Shune is one such fighter, but they also locate another specter in Chile, a young girl around Shune's age named Isla, who grew up in a cold and hostile orphanage and had become a street artist to try and raise money for the other kids of the orphanage. Isla wants nothing to do with KOF, but when she hears that Shune will be there, that's all she needs to know. She saw him in the last tournament and instantly hated him, because he had the same powers as her, but instead of being hated and feared by the adults, Shune had a wise old master guy in him. He had older fighters looking out for him and giving him advice. He had news reporters treating him like a celebrity. In other words, he was getting all the love and support Isla had never gotten. And this jealousy ends up consuming her until she's willing to join the tournament just so she can fight him. And I actually really dig Isla and Dolores. I think they've got some interesting powers and playstyles. I dig their backstories, and yes, their designs are super busy like Shune, but unlike Shune, everything about their designs work together. They all feel like they fit into one common theme, whereas Shune's design feels like they just said, yeah, I don't know, just throw a bunch of stuff together, it'll work out. My only problem with Dolores and Isla is that they're the only two new characters in this entire roster. The only other games to introduce fewer characters were KOF 12 and 13, games that were also criticized for their rosters. However, aside from this lack of new fighters, I actually think this roster is pretty great. A lot of people have complained about not being interesting enough and being too safe, and yeah, there isn't anything really weird in here, and you know me, I love my weird teams, but I get what they were going for with this roster. This roster was supposed to be a salute to King of Fighters. You see, King of Fighters 14 was the let's cross our fingers and hope this works game, but King of Fighters 15 was the holy crap, it actually worked! Hey, King of Fighters is back game! And that's what this roster is supposed to be. It's supposed to be the roster that declares KOF is here again. You got the new hero team and the new rivals team, the first time that we've had a hero and rivals team since 2005, so that's a big deal. Then you got Team Sacred Treasure, something that had always been important to the series, but now finally got to be on the main ticket rather than just being a secret team. Then to go up against them, you had the resurrected Team Orochi, so you got the heroes and villains of the Orochi saga all coming together again. Then you got Team K-Dash and Team Cronin being the heroes and villains of the Ness saga. Then you got Ash's team representing both sides of that saga. Then you got a bunch of standard teams mixed with some fan favorites. I think this roster did a great job of capturing every corner of the history of this franchise in one game. Except for Kim. Why the hell is Kim Kapuan not in this roster? That's the one big complaint I have with it. This roster is supposed to celebrate the history of this franchise, and yet it's the first time ever that Kim Kapuan was not here. That is so weird. Now, even though this game was once again part of a dedicated saga, the story was still pretty light, at least by KOF standards. Essentially, the hero and rivals teams meet in the finals, and the two amplified specters clashing on top of all the, say it with me everyone, fighting energy that had built up within the tournament, caused Verse to form again, this time coming out of Isla herself, forming into a new monster known as Reverse. You see, it turns out that amplified specters are tapping into human emotions and serve as conduits for them. That's why when Shune was a child, his powers went out of control, and it's also why when he is surrounded by large crowds, he becomes overwhelmed with anxiety. And it's also why Isla was always so ticked off. And since Verse's powers also come from the same mystical power source, this is why it tried to steal Shune's powers in the first game, and why it was able to merge with Isla in this game. Basically, amplified specters and Verse are all magic, and magic is powered by people's emotions, so when Verse appears, it causes Isla's emotions to go out of control, and that's why she becomes the new Verse. In fact, she's not the only one to lose control. When Verse appears, Shune almost goes into a rage, losing complete control of his powers again, until Matenkun and Benimaru step in and help calm him down. Shune is then able to defeat Reverse, while Isla confronts the real reasons why she hated Shune wasn't because she just didn't like him, it was because of jealousy. And after facing her own negative emotions, she's able to wake herself back up. However, after beating Reverse, it's revealed that there was a greater power at work here. You see, Reverse was just the opening act. They existed to gather souls, and they used the power of the emotions from these souls to open a gateway to another world where Atoma Raga, the goddess of truth and the mother of all life on Earth, could be summoned to end the world and bring about a new one. Yeah, that is one hell of a leap for this game to suddenly take. This game has such little story to it, and then all of a sudden at the very end they just go, here's God! They're wiping out reality, no further questions, gotta go, bye! But what matters when it comes to a KOF boss is, of course, the difficulty. How tough is Otomo Raga? That's kind of a difficult question. When the game was released, she was one of the easiest bosses in the whole series. A lot of people complained that she was something of a letdown, and yeah, I kinda have to agree. I was taking her out with just one character. She was near the bottom of my KOF boss tier list. But then, when making this video, I returned to the story mode for the first time in about 4 months, and somewhere along the line, SNK got mad we were all complaining about her because they buffed the hell out of her. I compared the footage that I recorded 6 months ago when the game got released to the footage that I recorded now for this video, and yeah, you can definitely see a difference. And just to double check this, I asked people online if they also noticed a difference just to get a second opinion. And yeah, everybody seemed to agree she does not play the same as she did when she got released. Something is different now. She has full screen specials and low and high mix-up attacks with nearly 0 frame startup, and she will now input read you so quickly she might as well freeze time. So, if you get this game on disc and you don't have an internet access to update it, then yeah, she's easy. If you get the update, well, she's still not crazy tough. I wouldn't put her at the top of the KOF boss tier list, but she is now sitting comfortably around the middle to upper middle area. But after defeating her, the sky clears up, everything goes back to normal, Clemens Bellamy returns, which, I have to point this out, when the monster attacks, he once again says he's here at great risk. I just love the idea that he's trying to turn that into his catchphrase. But Shunei looks out at the cheering crowd and he removes his headphones, signaling that he's starting to be able to deal with his anxiety and fears, which is great character growth for him. Now he just has to win 3 more tournaments so his outfit can look halfway decent. In Shunei's ending, he learns about how he lost control of his powers as a kid, and that's why his parents left him with Tung Fu Ru. But he says he now wants to go out and explore the world. The King of Fighters tournament exposed him to so many new people, and he feels confident now that he can finally leave here on his own and set out on his own journey. Meanwhile, in the Rivals ending, Isla is sent back home by Heidern, but she says she wants to make a quick stop in China first, clearly wanting to meet back up with Shunei, who she significantly softened up on. And hey, her teaming up with Shunei in the next game would make for a good team. I'd be on board with that. And they're not the only ones with important endings. Ash reunites with Shinwoo and Duo Lon, and even though the last time they saw each other they weren't exactly on the best of terms, they now know why Ash did what he did, and they've decided to forgive him, and they're happy that he's alive again. The 3 of them and Elizabeth all meet up for Krabs, which was literally what they were doing when they formed their team in KOF 2003, and I think that is a wonderful touch. That is a great way to end Ash's story. Kukri reunites with Dolores, and the 2 of them decide to go home. Kula returns to Team K-Dash. Antonov starts his wrestling career back up again with big plans for the future. Leona learns that her father might actually have been one of the people brought back to life by Verse, so she sets out with her team to go and find him. Ryo confronts his father Takuma and tells him that he's lost his passion for fighting, even donning his father's Mr. Karate mask to do so. A nice reference to how in Bariki 1, Ryo had taken over that mantle. Also, in the Art of Fighting ending, we see Ryo's student from Gaora Marker the Wolves in there, but if you saw our Fatal Fury video, you know that in Japan, his student's name is Marco Rodriguez. But in English, they changed it to Kushnud Butts. Well, guess what? In this ending, they officially swap his name back to Marco Rodriguez. It's about freaking time. Good call, SNK. Next, in the Secret Agents ending, Luong steals the gem from around Dolores' necklace, and then she gives Mary the intel that she was wanting on Geese. At which point she reveals she wasn't spying on Hein. No, she's working with him. Yes, Hein, the mysterious butler for Geese Howard in the last game, was actually undercover and is trying to find a way to bring Geese down. And he believes Dolores' necklace might have the power to do that. Too bad for him, Blue Mary and Vanessa swapped it out for a fake before Luong left. And the final team ending really worth mentioning is the Sacred Treasures, which sees them checking on Orochi's seal and find that it's still intact, so they decide to split up and go their own ways again. The scene then ends by cutting to Shingo still training with Saisu, a very nice continuation of that story, but after all that is done, after the credits roll, there is one final post-credit scene. All the team endings have a post-credit scene, and some of them are pretty nice, some of them are nice little continuations of the story, some of them are nice little one-off scenes that wouldn't really fit with the main ending. but the Team Sacred Treasures one is particularly important, because the final shot that we get after the credits is Kyo returning home and reuniting with his girlfriend Yuki. This is the first time we have seen these two together in a canonical game since he was kidnapped by Ness and went down a dark path looking for vengeance, which to me is the perfect way to close out his ending. It's a way of showing that Kyo, after all this time, has finally put the troubles of the past few games behind him, and he can finally get back to his life. Now, I went into more detail about these character endings than I did with most of the games because A, they're way longer than the endings in the other games, and B, they actually feel more important than most of the endings of the other games. I haven't brought this up yet, but the devs at SNK have been referring to this saga as the Shunei Saga, but a lot of the fans have been referring to it as the Verse Saga. And personally, I far prefer calling it the Verse Saga because, as I said with the Ash Crimson Saga, when you name your saga after the hero, it gives it this feeling like they're the only ones that matter and it's all about them. And that was a big problem with the Ash Crimson Saga. It was all about Ash. But here, you can tell from these endings, everyone has their own thing going on, and most of them actually progress their characters. The Secret Agents team is involved in this whole situation surrounding Geese. Kukri is trying to reunite with his mother. Leona's dad might have come back to life, and that could mean 1,000 different things for her character. Heck, even the teams that don't matter to Verse at all, like Fatal Fury, actually get some progression as Joe Higashi, after nearly 30 years, finally gets a date with Lily Kane. That's not a huge thing, but it does actually progress his story. After the Ash Saga, it feels so good to have a King of Fighters where every team feels like they matter. Maybe not to the big overall plot of the game, maybe not to the story of gods wiping out reality, but at least they matter to themselves. They matter to the characters, and they matter to the fans. These endings are great. And like I said, the game has only been out for a couple months, but so far it's already received some pretty heavy support. At the time of this recording, 3 teams have already been released for DLC. Team Mark of the Wolves returns for the first time since KOF 11, now going by Team Galro, or as they might as well be called, Team Fan Favorites. Made up of Bijane, Gato, and Rock Howard, who was now not in a side game. He wasn't a single entry character with no ending. No, he was now on an actual team in a mainline KOF game that had a story and an ending. Meaning there is no more denying it, Rock Howard is now finally canon in the KOF games. And the second team released was the returning Team Southtown, made up of Geese, Billy Kane, and Ryuji Yamazaki. And it is worth mentioning that in their ending, Geese just turns to Hein and says, "Oh yeah, by the way, Hein, I know you're a spy, are you going to fight me or what?" Hein does attempt to face off with Geese, but it does not go well for him. Probably because that gem they got from Luong turned out to be a fake, meaning that in a weird roundabout way, Blue Mary ended up saving Geese's life. Something I'm sure she doesn't want to think about. And the most recent team to be released was Team Awakened Orochi, which has kind of torn the fan base a little bit because on the one hand, it's tradition. If you got the regular Team Orochi in there, you gotta have their Awakened forms as well. It's just the way it's always been. And these characters play completely different from their regular forms, with a totally different moveset. So, looking at these characters on a purely mechanical level, yes, they are brand new characters. But looking at them on any level other than mechanical, no, these are not brand new characters. These are characters that are already in the game, and I totally get why some people are upset about that. When you think about all the big fan favorite characters or all the important mainstays of this series who still aren't in this game, I understand why some people would look at an entire DLC team being taken up by different versions of characters that are already in the game and being a little bit upset about that. However, after them, the final team of Season 1 was revealed to be Samurai Showdown, a team that, as I have stated multiple times, were originally meant to be in KOF 95 but ended up getting cut. So not only does this team finally bring one of the most teased teams in KOF history into reality, but also it means that Fatal Fury, Art of Fighting, and Samurai Showdown, SNK's 3 biggest early fighting game franchises, now all finally get to exist within KOF. The team was made up of Nakaruru, Haomaru, the wandering drinking samurai who has been the protagonist of Samsho since the start, and Darlie Dagger, a shipwright with a giant saw blade who is really awesome and one of the newest Samsho characters, so it's great to see SNK realizing how much people like her. Also, just going to give myself a quick little plug here, but over a year ago, we did an episode of our show, Build the Roster, where I pitched a hypothetical roster for a brand new Capcom vs. SNK, in which I said there should be a Team Samurai Showdown, and this is exactly the team that I pitched. That's all. I didn't really have anything else to add to that. I just wanted to take a quick victory lap. And the announcements still haven't stopped at Season 1. We don't know yet how well this game has sold, but it's done well enough to get an additional season of DLC. And so far for this second season, they revealed Kim Kap-Wan, making this KOF finally feel complete, and Shingo, who will finally get to return to a KOF game since getting beat up in KOF 11 and then going on a time-traveling journey to get flame powers. I told you all the KOF mangas are wild. I'm just gonna put this out there right now. His level 3 super had better be him unleashing some of those blue flame powers. You know people would love that. But these teams aren't the only bits of DLC that the game has gotten. In one of the most shocking additions to this game, they also add a free new boss challenge mode, which does help with the lacking single-player content that this game had, in which you can fight a super-powered Rugal. Yes, Rugal Bernstein was brought back to life by Verse, and he has stretched those legs, he's gotten all warmed up and limber, and he is ready to genocide Cutter all over the place. But that brings us to the future of King of Fighters. What is next for the Shun'ei Verse Saga? Well, maybe nothing. Yeah, the moment the future of this saga is kind of up in the air because back in February when this game was released, the developers gave an interview with Famitsu and they said they had originally planned on ending the Shun'ei saga with this game, making it only 2 games instead of 3. But they said that eventually they changed their minds. Kind of. They still don't know for sure if they want King of Fighters 15 to be the end. And yeah, that's kind of what this game feels like. We go up against the creator and destroyer of all reality. That definitely feels like an end. How on earth can you get bigger than that? Except that both Hydern and the Secret Agents team say that there is potentially something even bigger and more dangerous inside that dimension that Otoma Raga came from. And yeah, Shun'ei learned to face his fear of the outside world and he's heading out on his own journey to show his growth. That sounds like an ending for his character. But he also wants to go and see his parents again someday, but he's not ready to do that just yet, which means there's still something in his story that isn't resolved. And many other characters feel like they do get endings. Kukri is reunited with his mother, Ash is reunited with his friends, Kyo is reunited with his girlfriend. These feel like perfect endings for this saga. But then you got Leona going out there to try and find her father. That wasn't resolved, and that's kinda big. And what about Hein and Geese? That's something huge that's still just being set up. And you might have noticed I didn't mention who hosted the King of Fighters 15 tournament. It's a mysterious woman going by Anastasia. And that's all we know. You don't give a KOF host a name and then not plan on doing something with that. But I get why you would want to make this the end, why this saga would only be 2 parts instead of 3. Because back in the day, you could pump these games out in a matter of months. 3 games in 3 years was no problem. And back then, making fighting games loaded with content and a story mode wasn't that big of a concern. You could just spend your 4th year putting out a dream match game with no teams and no endings, just bringing back older characters, and that was enough. But today, this game took 6 years since the last game to come out, and there wasn't even a big crazy scandal behind the scenes. Okay, yes, there was the world-shattering pandemic, but even without that, it still would have taken them 4 or 5 years to get this thing made. You can't really do a 3-part storyline for King of Fighters anymore. That would take 12 years minimum to get through. And you saw how many people complained about the lack of single-player content for King of Fighters 15. No way would they be willing to put out a full-price dream match in this day and age with no storyline and no additional content. But I actually think I have a solution for this. I say make each saga moving forward just 1 game, but then make each pack of DLC the next installment in this saga. Picture this. King of Fighters 16 comes out. It starts a brand new saga with new teams and a new boss and a brand new hero, and each team has their endings and their lore, but then you buy the DLC pack for $30. And now, when you start the game up, you have 2 options on the menu screen. King of Fighters 16 and King of Fighters 16 Ultimate Battle, or Championship Edition, or whatever you want to call it. King of Fighters 16 is the game that you already own. King of Fighters 16 Ultimate Battle takes about 80% of the characters from the first game, but then you rearrange the teams around to create brand new combinations, and it introduces 6 to 8 brand new characters, and now you have a fully formed new roster with brand new teams. There's a new boss fight in the arcade mode, and each team has a brand new unique ending that progresses their story further. Then another year goes by and you put out another DLC pack called King of Fighters 16 Final Edition, or something much more catchy. And then you do the exact same thing there. You turn the game on and you got KOF 16 Classic with the original roster and story. Then you got KOF 16 Ultimate, which has the second installment. And then you got KOF 16 Final with, again, a large collection of characters from the other two versions, as well as a decent handful of new characters making new teams with new bosses and endings to wrap up the story. I've pitched this idea on Twitter before, and I've had people tell me that would be too confusing and too expensive, but I'm literally just pitching 2 seasons of DLC. We already have this. Just now, you'd get brand new story content with new characters, so that way you could once again have a full 3-part story that comes out yearly. Plus, we could get more interesting teams this way. Listen, the Ikari Warriors and Team Fatal Fury are going to be the exact same team unchanged until the end of time, because when these games can only have one installment every 6 years, you don't really have the leisure of getting that weird with the staples anymore. But let's say you put out KOF 16 and it's got all the standard teams. Team Fatal Fury is exactly the same, Team Japan is exactly the same, Team Ikari Warriors is exactly the same. But then you sell people the DLC packs, and in those you can completely change the teams around in new interesting ways, because if anybody wants the standard teams and the standard characters, they're all right there in the standard original release. Speaking of those teams, for anyone thinking, well, you said that in order to shift these teams around to create some new combinations, some characters would be cut from King of Fighters 16 Part 1 for the DLC Part 2. What if I want to form a team made out of characters from Part 1 and Part 2 who don't exist in that same version? Simple. If you buy any DLC pack, then you also get a free mode called King of Fighters 16 Dream Match. And in this mode, there's no story, no teams, you just get to fight with any character from any of the versions you own. If you buy the original release of the game and then you buy the first DLC pack, you can fight with any of those characters combined. If you buy the first version and the second version and the third version, then you can play with every single character together. And of course, the Dream Match mode would have an online mode, so that way you could go online and fight with every single character. And most importantly, this is a way to carry on the tradition of the Dream Match without having to charge people for a brand new installment of a game that just used all the pre-existing characters. It's just a suggestion. I'm not saying SNK has to do this, but if we want these sagas to have 3 parts from this point forward, as well as the Dream Match, yeah, they need to think of something, because just having them all be individual releases is not going to work, and this is about as good of a suggestion as I can come up with. Now, speaking of the future, as I said, this game just came out. It's only about half a year old at this point, making this the most recent game that we've ever covered in Retrospective, so I can't really talk about the impact the game has had or how well it sold, but it was the 4th most attended game at EVO this year, meaning that it had enough competitors to be featured on the main stage during the finale. Something I haven't been able to say about KOF Games since, I think, ever. And the fan reaction has been very positive. It had a high premiere on Steam. Its online scene is okay, nobody's perfect. But the important thing is that it's one of the biggest premieres that KOF has ever had. And it's not the only big leap KOF has made in the last few years. We have seen SNK characters guest starring left and right in other games. I cannot tell you how much interest in KOF skyrocketed when Terry Bogard got added to Smash Bros. And Masahiro Sakurai proceeded to put on a 40-minute free commercial for SNK because he is a man of culture who loves the hell out of these games. And over the past few years since King of Fighters 14 came out, I have seen that same love spreading and growing to a brand new audience, an audience I include myself in. And it's an audience that spans the entire globe. I have mentioned several times throughout this series about the impact that King of Fighters has had on so many different countries across the planet, and that has continued to be true with these latest installments. When King of Fighters 14 was featured at EVO, 6 different countries were represented in its top 8. That is a level of diversity and representation that you do not get in any other fighting game. That is incredible and speaks to how this franchise has always been and continues to be so important to so many different people across the entire planet. Folks, when I started this retrospective at the beginning of the year, I knew it was going to be hard. I knew it would be a long, winding road covering one trouble after another. It would be the story of a company that kept being beaten down time and time again. But I knew it was going to be worth it, because I knew this is what it was all leading to. I knew that in the end, it would be a story about a company that was run ragged and faced so many losses and was passed down from one corrupt owner to another. But in the end, it would be the story of a company that learned who they were, that learned what to focus on, and came out the other end of all their troubles better and brighter as they slowly built themselves back up into the company and the franchise that they were always meant to. Are you f***ing kidding me? So, yeah, this has been an incredible experience. Making this retrospective has been one of the biggest undertakings of my life, but also one of the most rewarding. I have enjoyed it so much, and since it started, I have been looking forward to this finale and leaving off on a positive note and talking about how much SNK turned everything around. But then, as we were making this series, between episodes 2 and 3, SNK was purchased by a new company. They were bought for over $600 million, which, if you want to know how much SNK has worked over the past couple of years to turn everything around and build itself back up, in 2015 they were bought for $65 million, and now after all their successes, it raised their value tenfold. That's very impressive. But they were bought for over $600 million by the EGDC, the Electronic Games Development Company, a Saudi Arabia-based organization designed to help bring the gaming market to Saudi Arabia and train future game developers. Okay, that's a fairly large shift, but teaching people about game development and bringing game jobs to a part of the world that was lacking this industry, not the worst thing I've heard. And the EGDC did work with SNK to create Naj for King of Fighters 14, so they already have a relationship with the company. And EGDC is owned by the MISC Foundation, a non-profit organization designed to help bring entertainment jobs to Saudi Arabia and invest money into television, movies, and other such entertainment establishments in the region. Hey, non-profit sounds good, and I'm in favor of people investing in television and film and other arts. That doesn't sound bad. And the MISC Foundation is owned by Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, who has a laundry list of human rights violations, including imprisoning peaceful protesters and killing journalists. That's bad. I really do not want to talk about this because, as I said, this retrospective has been an incredible experience, and working up towards that positive ending kept me going for months. But when this deal was made, it turned what was a fun salute to a series I love into a source of anxiety, as every single day people were tweeting or emailing me to make sure I knew about, make sure I knew all the horrible things that Salman had done, and in one particular instance of insanity, actually sending me a fully written script on the subject and demanding I read it word for word, which I will not be doing. I also didn't want to cover this because I have seen a few people talk about this online, and some people have made some very good points about it, while other people have just used this as an excuse to be really xenophobic, and boy do I not support that. But I do believe it is important to know who owns what company, and I do believe that's something that you should know before you make a purchase. And I have had so many people over the past few months telling me that they are now interested in KOF and they want to get into this franchise, and that is great. But I would feel kind of guilty if I got that many people into this game and then didn't share this latest breaking news. Essentially, in 2016, Mohammed bin Salman, a man who gained the majority of his money from oil, realized that oil won't last forever. He also realized that Saudi Arabia has a pretty bad image in the rest of the world, so he launched a project called Saudi Vision 2030 designed to make a push to improve the country's image in the media while building a new entertainment empire. And since then, he has purchased sports teams, entered into a 10-year-long relationship with the WWE, and invested a ton into video games and esports, including buying 5% of Capcom and Nintendo, and completely buying out SNK. Now, this just happened. Sure, they did own stocks in SNK since the end of 2020, but they didn't have controlling interest, meaning that they didn't have the power to really change anything. Now they own 96% of the company, meaning it's all theirs. And again, this just happened. We have no idea how this is going to affect SNK. Oda said that everyone from the MISC Foundation is very enthusiastic about fighting games and said that they have been mostly hands-off so far, and the only real change that's gone on is that they have opened up a new office in Tokyo. So, okay, on paper, none of that sounds bad, but who knows how that could change later on. But future plans aside, that's not really the problem that many KOF fans are facing right now. Because this could lead to SNK seeing booming sales and popularity like never before. Or it could lead to the next big SNK collapse and they could sell off all their titles again and KOF could vanish for 20 more years. We don't know. But no matter what happens, there's now this uncomfortable moral quagmire to KOF because no matter what happens with these games, in the back of your mind is now that knowledge that, oh right, this is owned by a really, really bad guy. And as I said, a lot of people have asked me to talk about this, and I get it, this is important. But I don't think most people have wanted me to talk about this just to make sure everyone is informed. I think that when something like this happens, most people just want an answer. Most people want someone to come in here and say that one thing that will clear it all up and make you realize, oh, it's fine, everything is going to be good and I can still enjoy this without that moral muckety-muck and everything is going to go back to normal. But, yeah, I hate telling you folks this, but I ain't got that answer. Because I have looked at this from every angle, I've studied the subject up and down, and I've written this script about 4 or 5 different times, and even tried going off script twice and improvising this final part in hopes that something brilliant will accidentally spew out of my mouth. But in the end, my answer is, I don't know. That's it. I don't know what to say about this. After all of this, I have no idea what to say. And believe me, I'm not saying that because I'm trying not to upset anyone by taking a side. No, this is the internet. The only thing that's going to get people more upset at you than taking a side is not taking one. And I'm not saying I don't know because I don't think this is important and it's not worth talking about. Oh no, this is important and it is worth talking about. I'm saying I don't know what to say because I don't know what to say. Sometimes the world just sucks. And that's all I can really say about this situation. It just sucks. And believe me, I've heard the arguments that everyone has made about this, and honestly, I don't think anyone is really wrong, and I think everyone has at least something of a point. I've heard people say that they want to boycott SNK now because they don't want their money going towards Salman, and yeah, that's a totally valid stance to take. But I've also heard people say that because Salman is a billionaire who gets the vast majority of his money from other sources, and because he doesn't own SNK, instead he owns the company that owns the company that owns SNK, and SNK brings in such little money compared to other big video game developers, it means that boycotting SNK would have zero effect on Salman, and instead would just harm SNK. And yeah, that's also a valid point to make. And I've also heard people say that you can't worry about this because everything is owned by someone evil today and you would go insane trying to focus on that. And yeah, that's certainly true. If you've bought sneakers, a cell phone, or drank a Coke, then you've given money to someone evil who's going to do something evil with it, and God help you if you bought any of that stuff on Amazon. So yeah, I totally understand people arguing that. And I also understand people arguing that shoes, phones, and beverages are more necessary to your daily life than video games, so it's not really a fair comparison. And I should also point out that I've been contacted by people who have argued that this is a positive because the Middle East has a very active fighting game community, and it's a community that never gets any attention. And this would help to bring focus and representation to a community that has largely been ignored. And I totally understand why that would mean a lot to people, and why that would be a good thing for that audience. But was there no other company that could have made that happen? Did it have to come from a guy who's done things I can't mention here because they would get this video demonetized? And I could keep going. Like I said, I've rewritten this part of the video 4 or 5 times, and each time I start picking apart the situation, it just gets longer and muddier and more depressing. But in the end, I just don't really have any answers about. I've thought over myself a lot over the past few months, and as of right now, yeah, I'm going to keep buying SNK games. Again, totally understand someone out there not wanting to buy them, totally understand someone disagreeing with this, but I'm going to keep playing KOF because so far the devs feel like they still are independent and still have control over their product, and it feels like Salman doesn't really have an impact on these games yet. But it does now suck that every time I talk about these games and get excited about the newest title coming out, it's going to come with that big-ass asterisk slapped on it. And it will come with the knowledge of who is sitting at the top, and that what SNK has going on now and all its good fortune could change at any time. And after all the ups and downs, after going through the makings of every single game and talking about the struggle that this entire series has had to go through just to exist, it sucks that I have to conclude things by saying that once again, the future of KOF is very, very uncertain. But I'll tell you something I am certain about. Yeah, I won't lie, this news, well, it isn't great. And I've basically spent the last 4 months drained having to talk about this because that is not the way I wanted to leave things. I didn't want this whole celebration of this franchise to lead up to just a big downer ending. But after doing this retrospective, after looking back at the long history of KOF, I've realized something. After learning the stories of this franchise and going through the ups and downs of every single game, I know that SNK and KOF are going to be fine. They might not be fine today, they might not be fine tomorrow, they might not be fine a year from now, or 2 years, or 3, or 5, or 10, but they will be okay. And do you know why? Because King of Fighters has been one of the longest running fighting game franchises in the world, having had more installments and spin-offs than any fighting game we've ever covered on these retrospectives or any game we will ever cover. And is that because of its massive record-breaking sales and the highly profitable name brand value of its titles? God, no! These games sell for scrap! Even their biggest successes still dwindle behind other fighting game releases. When Terry Bogard was added to Smash, people thought he was a grown-up Pokemon trainer. Most of the people watching this video right now had no idea who Kyo or Iori were when this retrospective began. This series has not survived because SNK had money, and when they did have money, they typically used it to buy a gun and then shoot themselves in the foot. No King of Fighters has survived for all this time because KOF is, and always has been, the rock on the shore. It has been pounded and battered with waves after waves for years, but still survived. Even when it was buried so deep by the water that you couldn't even see it, it was still there, waiting for the tide to go out so it could return. And why is that? What's the secret to King of Fighters' longevity? It's because of two things. First is the dedication of the developers over at SNK. These are people who have always fought and struggled to make magic out of nothing. No matter what resources they had to pull from, they kept these installments coming, running on pure enthusiasm and a crazy adventurous spirit that encouraged them to keep trying again and again and again. The teams making King of Fighters were always united by a passion that I have not seen almost anywhere else in mainstream gaming. Oh, our company is going out of business? Well, screw it. We're going to put every single possible SNK guest star we can into this final game. I don't care if they're tossing us out of the building as we're programming it. This game is getting made. Oh, SNK went bankrupt? Well, then we're going to pick everything up, move to another company, and buy the games back one by one ourselves. It's going to take us a year and a half to draw the sprites for this new game, then we're going to make them the best looking sprites you have ever seen. Our company is giving us no money and no staff to try and resurrect their gaming division, then we are going to make this the biggest installment the franchise has ever had. The sheer passion and dedication of everyone who has worked on these games has pulled off miracles time and time again. Think about this. Midway went bankrupt. And that was just the end of Midway. Mortal Kombat went to Warner Brothers, and that's all, folks. Midway was done. Konami fell for the trap of Pachinko Vacation, and they're just gone. No more games, except for the ones that everyone hates. SNK has gone bankrupt and fallen into Pachinko Vacation twice, and they're still here. And hey, I ain't trying to say what we're heading for now with SNK is just like that. I'm not saying it's the same. This is a whole new territory. But what I'm saying is that KOF is tough, and the KOF developers are tougher. Rough times may be ahead, but KOF is going to survive. But SNK and KOF's success hasn't just been thanks to the developers, no, because you see, the other big factor in KOF's history, the other thing keeping this series going after all this time and after so many stumbles, is you. It's the fans. And I am not saying that to try and suck up to the audience, I am not saying that for some cheap applause, I'm saying that because it's true. While going back and replaying all these games and delving into the mechanics and the stories and the development of each game, I came to appreciate these games in a way I never had before, but I came to appreciate the fans even more. Out of the entire massive landscape of fighting games, King of Fighters, and again, not saying this for any cheap applause or to play to the audience, I'm saying it because of what I have seen with my own two eyes. King of Fighters has the best fan base of any fighting game. These games don't sell big numbers, they don't bust blocks, but the people who have played them, the people who have learned these characters, they are a community that is so tightly knit together and so supportive that it puts other gaming franchises to shame. Yes, as I said, I got a few rude messages in relationship to SNK's new owners and in regards to how I would cover it. But it's the internet, you're always going to find that. But that was a drop in the ocean of positivity that I have seen from the KOF fans, not just for these videos, but for each other. There are so many KOF YouTubers, so many KOF artists, so many KOF cosplayers, so many people that love this franchise, and they support each other like a team. Heck, I have had multiple artists draw thumbnails for these videos, major shout out to them by the way, and I have seen so many of them get a huge surge in followers after posting this art. Do you know why? Because the KOF community shows up for KOF. And that's how they've kept this franchise running. SNK has come crashing down so many times, and yet the KOF fans have continued to run into those burning remains and pulled this series out of the wreckage time and time again. What I'm trying to say, folks, is yes, I don't have any answers about the current situation. I don't know what the future holds for SNK. I don't know what to do, and I don't know what could happen to KOF, and this is indeed a big thing that should not be made light of. But KOF is more than a game. SNK is more than a company. It's a community that has built up through generations of stories and characters, and that's something that will never die. Yes, the person at the top running everything right now is a bad guy, but KOF will pull through the way it always has, through teamwork. And no matter what happens, this series could go away for another decade. They could go bankrupt again and again. But as long as that community continues to exist, KOF will live to fight another day. Folks, thank you so much for sitting through this astronomical retrospective. This wasn't just our largest retrospective to date, this might be the largest video that we ever end up doing. If you like this video, then you know what, it's part 4 of the series. You guys all know what to do down there with the subscribe and the bell and the comments and the thumbs up and all that stuff. Instead, I'm going to close all this out by saying, I wasn't lying when I said this has been an incredible experience. And yes, it did get kind of depressing halfway through all of it. But the love and support that the KOF community has shown me while making these videos is what made me keep going, and I want to thank all of you for that. And a massive, huge thank you to the artists who provided artwork for all the title cards that we had. Seriously, you guys did incredible work on all of these, and I linked to each of their individual pages in the individual videos, so make sure that you go back, check them out, make sure you follow them and support them. They were each great to work with, and their art came out incredible. Thank you guys again for joining me for this massive, crazy journey. Stay safe out there, and come back next time.
AMBC クレメンス・ベラミーが決勝会場よりお送りしました。さようなら。
Oh, also, here's my ranking of all the games. No, I will not be elaborating on that or taking any questions. Bye, everybody!